And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to Mind War Episode 3. Very excited to have you with me this evening. If you're from the off-topic community or any of the other communities I'm part of, tuning in tonight, I love you guys. Excited to have some fun once again on this cold November night. I hope everyone brought some snacks and drinks with them. We're gonna have a fun night tonight. Got this vibe up, of course. This is the vibe of the stream, I've decided. This is where I'd like all of us to imagine we are having a snack, having a drink, and just discussing the clown world around us. I wanted to talk tonight a little bit about who I am and the purpose of this stream and future work I plan on doing. My name is Adam, just a random Canadian guy in his mid-30s who realized that when I started looking into all this stuff about 7-8 years ago, that just something in my gut felt like this wasn't right. I had ignored how the world worked for the most part up until that point, and my immediate gut reaction was, something is wrong here. If things were working as they should be working, as they are presented to be working, we would not see the insane levels of incompetence that we see in people in power. And this is what pretty much started me on my journey of figuring out how the world really works and how we are being systematically deceived and have been getting deceived for at least 50 years, if not much longer. So the primary topic for my stream and future work is going to be psychological warfare in media and entertainment. But I'm also going to be venturing into many other topics and also some non-conspiracy truth topics, such as just general psychology. I've done quite a bit of research on personality disorders and relationship dynamics and such things like that, which many people find interesting to talk about. I do as well. Those are also topics that people need awareness of now more than ever, especially as relationships are collapsing all over the West due to the toxic environment we're all in these days. And we can get so much meaning from having a healthy relationship that it's really wise to research these topics and understand these topics. And you can also really get hurt quite severely if you're in an abusive relationship. And abusive behavior is more common than ever these days, as we drift further and further away from God, meaning, community, pretty much anything that matters other than being an atomized individual, just trying to get as much power as you can without caring about anyone around you. Systems in place today are just fundamentally broken, and it's up to us on an individual level to try and find a path of meaning within the sick society. So I hope some of you are joining here tonight. If anyone's in the stream, feel free to say hi. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the stream. I'll be happy to answer anything. So some topics for tonight are going to be the power of intent and how our intent and how we feel internally affect those around us. We can think of this especially from like a family development level. If someone is a baby, for instance, and they have a mother or a father who does not have good intent for them, and perhaps they have a personality disorder, perhaps they are abusive to their child, how this is going to harm the child significantly over time, even if there is no overt physical abuse. And just how important it is to understand how our intent affects the world around us, and how important it is to try and be loving whenever we can. This makes me think about how toxic online communities can be sometimes. And like the state of the world today, there is so much suffering going on. So much suffering. And when we talk to each other online, it's as if there's not a human being behind that screen. We're lashing out at them, wishing their family dies. Like, that's the more extreme end, but I really just think it's important that we recognize that most people are not doing so well these days, and that we should try and bring more love and kindness into the world and into our interactions with others. So we're going to be watching a video about the power of intent called the Rice experiment. Very cool experiment, which was carried out by Truth Stream Media, who are a couple who does truth research, who I trust from seeing their content long term, that they have good intent and are trying to bring awareness to the world about these important things. If we don't bring this awareness to the world, humanity is going to be able to... The ruling class is going to be able to keep humanity under control pretty much indefinitely. And with the technology and power that is in their hands currently, it's possible that humanity is already in checkmate. But I believe that even if we have a 1% chance of stopping the evil being committed here, that everyone who understands how it works pretty much has a moral duty to try and bring awareness. And that's my main focus of doing this stream and any future work I do. I plan on doing this work for probably the rest of my life, but definitely at least another 10, 20 years. So this is just the beginning of my journey. Other topics tonight, we'll be watching a video about Antarctica. Antarctica is a strange subject. I actually haven't done a lot of research on this subject myself, so we'll be learning together from watching a video on it. I'm quite curious to learn more about it. But from what I understand, it's just this icy plain with nothingness there, and yet all the powers that be behave as though it is of critical strategic importance to have some control over Antarctica. Why is that? Why do all the leaders think this is so critical? Why do they have that sort of shared board of Antarctica with all the different countries on it? It's interesting to consider. I mean, some people would say, who are more in the space is fake, we've been lied to about the foundation of reality. Everything when they've shown us of space has been fake. The reality is actually flat. They might argue that Antarctica functions as like, beyond Antarctica, perhaps there is more land or different areas of the reality. Or perhaps something about Antarctica reveals some sort of secret that they do not want humanity to understand. I mean, if the globe reality is not real, I'm not saying this is true, but it's possible that they would be keeping humanity in one particular area of the reality and calling it Earth, just to sort of confine us to that area so we didn't understand that there was a ton more area in this reality than we previously thought. That's a bit going out there on the schizo end, though. I'm not advocating that we believe in flat Earth and all that, but interesting things to consider nonetheless. Finally, we'll be doing the classic. We'll probably be doing a bit of this every stream, which is analyzing some psychological warfare in media and entertainment. So that'll be fun. Have some videos lined up of some of the best researchers on this type of thing that I've learned a lot from. Very important that we raise our awareness on how entertainment is being used as a weapon against the public, and how it is used to shape our beliefs and behavior. Just imagine the power that the ruling class had when they had a TV in every single American's home, every Western person's home, that they had total control over what the American people were subjected to on that screen. Think about how easy it would be if you knew what you were doing and you understood these principles and how it worked. You understood how to put something on a screen that makes people feel a certain way about a certain thing, makes people believe a certain narrative because you've masterminded the storyline and the empathy dynamics, and you understand how humans react to the conditioning. This has been basically a weapon in every home in the West from people who hate us, who pretend to love us, for decades and decades and decades now. Just gonna have a sip of water here. But yeah, they use terms like conspiracy and conspiracy theory to mock anyone talking about topics like this. They don't want the public objectively analyzing ideas like this. They just want you to mock them and laugh them off and socially ostracize them if they talk about it. Any topic that threatens the ruling class, they have conditioned the public to either view as you're a crazy person, that's social outcasting essentially, or even better, you're evil. So you're a Nazi, you're a white supremacist, etc. Oh, you're a white country that wants to prioritize your own people. You're a white supremacist and you're evil. Even though that is normal, healthy behavior that literally all groups do, except for white people now because they have been systematically brainwashed into self-hate. Tragically. And people have been brainwashed to think that if white people are to love their people, then they are guaranteed to turn into the Nazis and go around murdering everyone. This is obviously false, and all groups should prioritize and love their own people first in any country they are in. I also wanted to touch a little bit on just a random topic I've been thinking about lately, and that is authenticity. And just how important authenticity is in general to the quality of our lives, let's put it that way. What is authenticity? Authenticity is, most people don't even know how to behave authentically. They don't fully understand who they really are, what their actual opinions are. They're just so used to wearing a mask in public, wearing a mask in all of their social situations, that they've almost lost who their true identity is over time. This causes a negative impact on all of your relationships in life because they're built off of inauthentic foundations. And it's just very important that we learn to discover who we are. We learn to stop worrying about how the world is going to judge us, giving ourselves the validation that we need so we don't rely on the outside approval, and learning how to think less and be more. You don't need to plan out exactly what you're going to say in every situation. The ideal state to be in here is to just let it arise. Let it come out. Get out of your own way. The people who give the best speeches don't plan out intricately every detail of their speech, or the people that people tend to like the most in general. They're the ones who are being the most authentic. They're just not getting in their own way, and they're just authentically stating their inner monologue. This is an ongoing battle for everyone to get better at this, myself included. I try to be as authentic as I can be in general, whether it's online or in person, to the people around me. Sometimes there are situations where maybe you should hide your opinion. For instance, if you're at work and you have beliefs like mine, maybe you don't want to reveal that you're a far-right white nationalist, right? So it depends, but in general, for the people who you're close to, you should be trying to be as authentic as possible with yourself and with them, and trying to think less and just have the courage to potentially be disliked. And through this process, you will also find the people who you are meant to be close with and meant to be friends with. So I hope to use this stream to teach people, as I've said, about these topics, but also I would love to form a nice community. Eventually, probably open a Discord server branched off from here. We'll vet people who want to come in, and we'll try and build a nice little community over time. So this is just the beginning of the journey. Very excited, guys. Mind War episode 3 right now. And let's dive into today's topics. I'm going to check the chat here, see if anyone has joined us thus far. Doesn't look like it. If you guys are in the chat, feel free to say hi. Feel free to ask any questions if you have any. So, first topic today is going to be the power of intentions. This is a Rice experiment carried out 7 years ago now. I remembered it today. I thought it would be interesting to cover on the stream. So let's just get right into it here. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. And we will get into it now. Let's go.
We decided to repeat a popular experiment that has been done by many others online. And while science has failed to recognize the importance, many independent thinkers have now pondered with first-hand evidence what the impact of our feelings could really be. One of science's least measured phenomena may be one of the most important: the power and energy of emotions, moods, attitudes, speech, and behavior.
Well, that's a rather simplified suggestion of a complex mental process, but you get the idea. Cause, effectual patterns of emotional response. Rage,
the results were startling, not so much the conclusion in itself, but to experience it firsthand. What follows is the impact of our actual words. Perhaps our intentions matter.
Do you ever think about the things that you say, not just to other people, but yourself? What effect, if any, those things actually really do have? I don't just mean the superficial effects or the emotional reactions to the words that you say, but is there something deeper, a more tangible physical effect? Dr. Masaru Emoto spent the last 20 years of his life studying the molecular structure of water. It's said that Emoto believed that water is a blueprint for our reality, and that human consciousness and intention can actually affect water and change it.
We create 50 frozen samples of...
Very interesting here, this research on water. As we know, the human body is mostly made of water, and it is reacting, you could say, to the vibrations or the frequencies in the world. And it seems like our intent and our focused thought influences these vibrations or frequencies.
Every water specimen, and frozen at minus 25 degrees centigrade. The crystals start to grow and expand as the temperature of the ice tip rises under the microscope. A beautiful hexagonal crystal with delicate trimmings growing slowly from the 6 points of the hexagonal core.
After photographing frozen water crystals from different water sources under a microscope, he began to experiment with the effects of different letters, then words, then pictures on water crystals. He would expose the water sources to the pictures, to the words, and then freeze them and photograph them to see if these things had any effect on the frozen crystals. What he came back from the microscope with is some pretty amazing stuff.
Emoto decided to see how thoughts and words affected the formation of untreated distilled water crystals. healing versus heavy metal music.
Wow, look at that.
What happens to the water molecules?
Over the years, this evolved into playing different pieces of music for water to see if the water's structure changed, and praying over water, and then photographing it before and after he prayed over it. And what he found was so astonishing that even today, people are still trying to debunk it as pseudoscience because it has huge implications on, well, everything. And nobody wants the personal responsibility of that, I don't think. Saying nice, good, beautiful things to water, playing beautiful pieces of music to it, or offering heartfelt prayers over the water produced beautiful shapes under Dr. Emoto's microscope. But on the flip side, hateful messages and angry, disjointed music produced misshapen, ugly shapes under his microscope. A few months ago, I was looking into Dr. Emoto's work, and I came across people all over YouTube carrying out something they called the rice experiment, which is based on Emoto's work, and with what has been, for many people, some pretty surprising results. And as I've probably mentioned on this channel before, I homeschool, and we thought that our son would appreciate this one, so we did it for his science class.
Sterilizing a few jars and cooking some standard rice. We put 3 batches of this food, filled with absorbed water, to the test, with emotional treatment as the variable.
All right, so here's what we got. So what's this one? This one, this one. This one, we ignore.
So, neglect, one of the most common modern abuses that children go through. We're going to see what effect neglect might have on a developing child here.
What do we do with this one? Come tell it stuff.
I hate you and I want you to die. I mean, you just look like a bunch of maggots. It's not, I can't make a joke about it even. It's so pathetic. Ah, you're so sad. I hate you.
You're not rice, you're disgusting. You're putrid. And I know what's going to happen to you. You're going to turn black like your soul.
You're slimy and foul, and you look like something that was scraped off the bottom of a Grand Central Station toilet. I don't think it's possible for me to hate an inanimate object more than I hate you.
Alright, love rice.
Oh, how the pillowy clouds of heaven could not compare with your beauty. I love you.
I love you, love rice. And my favorite is rice. You're my best friend. Forever. I love you.
This is the way rice is supposed to be. Perfectly steamed, organic. I love you, rice. You're a really good example of rice.
Unlike that other guy over there.
And you're better than everything. I love you more than everything, even my mom.
And this is the control rice.
The message is a thought, not the word. Thought, not the words. The vocal mechanism codes the words into vibrations and transmits them as sound across the communications channel, which is, of course, the air.
So, here's the results of our 2-month-long rice experiment. But before I get into this, I just want to say that when you look this up on the internet, what you will find are a lot of very hateful people who are angry that we would dare to call this an experiment because we're not doing it in a level 4 biohazard unit or something, and that this isn't real science, so they're going to debunk it. And I just think that's kind of ironic and silly because they go into it with the intention of debunking it, and then they tell you how they tried it and it totally failed, and here's all the ways it could fail, and it just takes one molecule in the air to make the whole thing, whatever, okay? Yeah, if you go into it with that intention, that's kind of what this experiment is designed to show you. And so it's no wonder that you were able to debunk it. That's kind of the whole point. So I just think that's really silly. People get so ate up about real science. Okay,
the point is, it's an experiment that a layperson can do in their home, to show the importance of intention and the effect that can have. And I was actually really surprised by the results that we ended up with, because I kept an open mind on this one. I'd seen people do this experiment, and I'm homeschooling my son, so I thought for science class we could try this just to see what we ended up with. And I'm just really surprised, actually, at what we got, because check this out. So let's start with this love rice. This is our love rice here, and I'm going to turn it to the side, and hopefully you can see that, and I'll have close-up shots as well. But this rice actually doesn't look that bad at all. There's no mold in it, if you can see that. There's no mold in this rice at all. It's a little discolored, it's turning a little gray, but there's also hardly any condensation in this jar. And so that, almost from a distance, looks like just normal cooked rice. You wouldn't be able to tell that this has been sitting in this jar for 2 months now. And it's way better than this right here. Looks like a mutated nightmare out of Silent Hill. It's really, really disgusting. Some of this is actually turning orange and red. It looks like it's rusting in the jar. In the front right here, you have this nasty green mold pile that's actually growing fur. There's all kinds of condensation going down the sides of the jar. I mean, it looks really disgusting. There's like a bright orange piece of rice. I didn't even know rice could turn bright orange, but it did. This is really disgusting. That is nasty.
So, very interesting here. You could say the people making this video purposely did something to this rice to have it turn out this way, and that they are trying to mislead the public maybe, but I feel after seeing their work over a very long time that they have good intent and would not lie or try to mislead the public about this topic here. And even if this wasn't literally true, it's just a good mindset and belief to have the belief that your intent towards others, your words towards others, have both a positive and negative effect on them. If it's not literally on a spiritual frequency level of like changing the molecules of the water in their body, then it might just be psychological, purely psychological.
It's nasty from super far away, and visually you can see right away there's a huge difference between this jar and this jar. But what I think is actually the most interesting for me was the ignored rice, which also has a ton of condensation in it. In the back, you have what used to be gray rice that's starting to turn black. There's a big black mold spot in the middle underneath here, and the entire thing is covered in what looks like snow, like a big mound of white mold. And there's also a ton of condensation in it as well. And so none of this rice looks the same at all, even remotely. This is rice, this is organic rice that was cooked with reverse osmosis water in the same batch, and then was placed into 3 of the same type of jar that had been sterilized with boiling water in the same exact manner at the same time, placed in the same spot on the counter. And I know the debunkers say, well, just one molecule getting in there, but you should expect that this rice will look even remotely similar. And it doesn't look anything alike. All 3 of these jars are very different. And so how is that explained by just claiming, oh, it's just one molecule in the air? I mean, come on. This is really different from here to here. I mean, this is night and day difference.
A few years ago, it was quite popular to say, I will believe nothing that I cannot see or handle or know with my physical senses. Today, this attitude is considered quite unscientific. Much of modern science deals with very real quantities and qualities that are beyond the range of the physical senses.
Despite the fact that we used to do a lot of food videos on this channel about ways to grow your own food and things like that. People nowadays come onto our channel sometimes and they say, you never give any solutions to anything on your channel. And, you know, half the problem, I think, is just talking about the things that we talk about. First of all, you can't have a solution if you don't even know there's a problem. But that having been said,
Indeed, awareness about what's being done to us has to be the first step here, because not enough people are even aware of the crimes against humanity by this elite cult who has been manipulating us.
I also think people are just waiting around for someone else to always tell them what the answer is to everything. And I don't think they realize how much power and control they actually do have over their own life. And I don't know, so I think some of the people that get real angry because they say this isn't a real science experiment or whatever, and they want to debunk it and tell you how powerless you really are and that there's nothing to it and everything like that. I think some of those people actually don't want this to be true, because I think they don't want to have to take responsibility for their own intentions and how those intentions have affected their life, possibly in negative ways, and the people around them too. This is
Indeed. Hateful people who are constantly in a hateful sort of state, who are cruel to the people around them, would not want to have to contemplate the idea that they have been negatively influencing the people around them. And with the state of the world today and things like this potentially being true, we should at least keep an open mind about it. But it's just more important than ever to, I think, to treat everyone around us well, with kindness and with love. I think a general good life philosophy is to, throughout your life, have a goal to positively impact those around you as much as you can. At least, as long as it's not coming at a significant cost to yourself. For instance, don't try to make abusive people happy and whatnot. But in general, try and be a positive influence on those around you.
It's going to make me think a lot harder about just the way I interact with everybody anymore. Just everybody. I mean, you hear people arguing in like a Target or something with each other. Just real hateful things are coming out of their mouth. I'm going to be thinking about this rice, you know? Or all those moms that I always see out at the grocery store and they're completely ignoring their children who are, you know, little babies in the shopping cart playing with iPads and stuff. Ignoring. I mean, look at this. And just love. The intention of love. I mean, this is 2-month-old rice and it looks almost good enough to eat. There's hardly any condensation and no mold in this jar. How does that happen? Because the only real difference here is our intentions.
I wasn't that surprised because I did see the videos about this that other people had done, and the results are consistent. That's got to mean something. And I saw it done with apples and other food. You know, everything has a relationship of water. There's water in us, there's water in food. But I don't know if I had thought about it in such a tangible kind of way, of the way it affects ourselves, each other, the way I treat other people.
So you're going to start treating me like that one over there, right? And not that one over there.
I've been pretty much over here on this side.
Just kidding.
How are you going to treat me? It reminds me of, what's that movie where the woman cries? She makes really good soup, but she cries into the soup, and then everyone feels it when they eat the soup, but it's really good. And
the foreign one, I can't remember what that movie is.
I don't know what it's called, but it reminds me of that.
El llanto fue el primer síntoma de una intoxicación extraña. Una gran melancolía y frustración hizo presa de todos los invitados y los hizo terminar en el patio, los sofales y los baños, añorando el amor de su vida.
I mean, we all watched this happen for weeks. Other people have done this experiment. What's really going on here?
So, this is rice that, for weeks, we told really nice, loving things to. I mean, as much as you can love a jar of rice, we tried to love this jar of rice, which, at first when you do this experiment, you are going to feel silly. That's just how it is. Or not if that's your thing. You know, rice in jars. But I'm just saying, I at first felt kind of silly, but after a while you get used to it. You know, it's kind of like talking to plants, or, well, not really because plants are alive, but, you know, it's just, this rice feels even more silly to say hateful things to an inanimate object, but sometimes we didn't even say hateful things to the rice. Sometimes we just hissed at it. But it's the intention. That's the main difference here. That's what matters. And this to me, I'll tell you what this reminds me of. Back when I was really depressed in my life and I had a lot of health issues and stuff, and I was really overweight, it was almost like it got to a point where I just wanted to gain more weight, almost like a shell to keep people away from me. I was very antisocial, had a lot of issues, and that's kind of what this reminds me of, because you know that neglect is also a form of abuse. Most of us realize that, but it's like this rice has built a shell over itself to protect itself from being ignored. As if it knew it was the ignored rice. I don't know how to explain all of that. I just know that the main difference here is our intentions and how that affected these things. Because that's the only real difference between this, and this. I mean, that's the only difference. You know, and obviously it's a very important one. And what this experiment tells us, what it proves to us, is that our intentions are very powerful. They're very important in your life. The average individual has no idea how much power he has simply by setting his own intentions. And there are lots of things that science cannot prove. And one of those things are cases that have come out where people had devastating diseases, cancer, stuff like that, and they thought themselves well. They literally thought themselves well. They refused to believe in their cancer. They refused to give it any more of their attention, and they spent all of their time believing that they were healed.
If a doctor should tell you that you have cancer, that if he doesn't operate, you're doomed to die, how do you believe in him? By agreeing with his diagnosis? No. You truly believe in the doctor when you let him operate, when you submit yourself to it.
There are people who have had cancer go into remission, and that's really the only thing that changed. And so science can't explain that.
It is possible to know all this and still be lost, still not believe it. Here is a simple illustration. 2 statements concerning this chair. First, I know it will hold me up. Second, well, I believe it will hold me up. Which statement is correct? The first. I know that chair will hold me up because it's a good, strong chair. We wouldn't have it here in the laboratory if it weren't, but I don't believe it. Because you can't believe in a chair standing up. Now I'm believing in the chair. I'm trusting myself to it.
To me, this proves something that I already knew in my own life. You have seen this before. A person who gets up every day, they're a real Debbie Downer, and they go, oh, today's gonna suck, and then what happens? Their day sucks. They have set their intention that their day sucks, they believe their day will suck, and they attract a terrible, sucky day. They make it happen. You know? And it is that simple. A lot of things in this universe are really that simple, and this is one of them. And it kind of branches off into a whole direction of things that I have all kinds of questions about. You know, things that we've heard about how the observer changes the experiment. I mean, where do you think that kind of stuff comes from? I feel like it works on the same principle as 100th monkey syndrome, and that same principle of when you walk into a room and you see someone across the room and you just know that's a bad person because you get a feeling that you can't explain any other way. All of these things are connected, in my opinion.
For some reason, many people seem to have 2 kinds of...
She made a good point there about how important it is to just set the correct intent. If you think you're going to have a terrible day, if you think something is going to go badly, you're attracting that to unfold in the way you don't want it to. very important to try and consciously bring good energy, bring positivity, and be a place of generating the vibe rather than reacting to the environment around you.
Faith. One they reserve for values they consider absolute. 2 times 2 equals 4. The law of gravity. And then a so-called religious faith, which is almost a retreat from fact into a realm of fantasy. They seem to have 2 compartments in their brain. They keep their science on one side, their religion in the other, with a wall between them. They're afraid to remove the wall, fearing that their faith will be swept away by fact and hard reality. To say the least, such a faith lacks honest conviction. Only a faith that is founded on truth can survive.
I know that it's really a silly idea to talk to rice, okay? I get it, but just do it to show yourself how powerful your intentions are and what kind of change that can make in your life. Do we need to be doing this to ourselves? A lot of us do this to ourselves. I know I'm guilty of having done it many times in my life. Do we need to do this to ourselves or this? You could be doing this every day to really affect their own life and the people around them in this kind of a way. Can you imagine what kind of world we would have? It's something to think about anyway.
Change the message, change the message.
Also, we can think about this in terms of how the elite may be manipulating society when they put mass fear and negativity into the public consciousness. For instance, during COVID, constant 24/7 fear propaganda every day. If stuff like this is true with the water molecules, how might this be affecting the populations? And even if it's not literally true that it's changing the water molecule, how is it affecting the public anyways to be constantly put into a state of fear and hate and division and negativity? And how might that benefit their control structures over us? So that's the end of that video there. I think that was a very interesting topic to consider. I'm not saying that that experiment proves anything at 100% true. I just think we should be open-minded to these things and continue to investigate whether they are true or not. All right, next up we got Antarctica. I'm excited for that. I'll check the chat quick. Looks like Holly has said quite a bit here. Anti-metal propaganda. No, I enjoy the rant, Holly. Just reading it now. Yeah, definitely could be for the first point. Yeah, true. That might be a bad example. That does make sense within a grocery store context where you're busy doing something. That's not necessarily neglect, that's just keeping them busy while you're doing a small task. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Bringing a kid into a store can be difficult. Yeah, you definitely can't not have cancer by trying to make yourself believe that you don't have cancer, I agree. Still though, interesting video for everyone to consider. If there's anyone else in the chat, feel free to say hi. Let me know you're here, and we'll get into Antarctica next. That should be very fun. Actually wanted to first watch this little 3-minute video of something Bill Cooper said about 25 plus years ago now. So let's see what he said back then and how it's relevant to today.
Their whole purpose throughout history has been to teach a small number of people how to become adept at controlling everyone else. Their goal is to destroy all existing religions save theirs, all existing governments save theirs, and shackle the mob in a system of eternal oppressive debt chained to a computer for the rest of their life, in a propagandized world to make them believe that they are happy in this system. Now, do you think they're succeeding? Haven't I described to you just now exactly what is going on in the world today? Yes, they're succeeding. They're succeeding because the American people don't understand their enemy. They don't even know what's happening. There's a method to their madness. There's really not much method to yours, because you're operating from a place of ignorance. And until you change that, you're going to be bumbling around, bumping into each other, saying and doing the wrong things, not understanding the nature of your enemy. And if you don't understand the nature of your enemy and the weapons they use, you cannot fight that enemy. You can't fight the battle. You shouldn't even be on the battlefield. That's why you're losing the war. And don't tell me you're not, because I'm in a place of great knowledge about who's winning and who's losing this war. And I can assure you, you're losing the war. This country was founded by dangerous men. Amen. And the moment the people in this country cease to be dangerous men, it's going to be the day we cease to have a country. And I'm going to tell you right now, unless we can be successful in creating a real free press where the American people get different viewpoints other than those expressed in the establishment-controlled media, there's going to be a civil war in this country, and it's going to come soon. The only thing that can stop it is by waking up vast amounts of sleeping people. Sheeple is what they are. They are following the Judas goat right into the shearing pens, and from there they will go to the slaughter, and they will not know that anything is wrong until they smell the blood of the sheeple in front of them.
Very good little 3-minute speech there by Bill Cooper. Long time ago, he was recognizing that actually we were at war here and we were losing, and that if we don't wake up soon, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And also that if the men in your society cease to be competent, cease to be capable of being dangerous, as we've seen the feminization of men over the years, the deliberate demonization of masculinity, toxic masculinity, they say, and such things. This is to eliminate the threat from the ruling class perspective. They don't want a country full of strong, bonded, connected, religious men with strong, healthy families who are able to fight for their own interests, obviously. And this is part of the reason why they've opened the floodgates to mass migration, to use them as a biological weapon against the host population so that they are unable to fight back. So we have been at war here for at least 50 years, and we have been systematically being brainwashed and neutered of our power and put into a situation where it's very difficult to fight back. But our awareness about these things is growing every single day, and it's more people than ever currently understand these things. And if we can reach critical mass at some point in the next 5 or 10 years, it is possible that we can do something about what these people are doing to harm our countries. All right, now we got Antarctica. I'm very excited. So the video I have lined up here is 44 minutes long. I don't know if we'll watch the whole thing, but wanted to look into this a little bit. Turn this down a little. But wanted to look into this a little bit. Thought it would be interesting. I haven't explored Antarctica in quite a while. So let's just jump right into it. Why is it so strategically important for all of these countries? What are they potentially hiding with Antarctica? Let's get into it now. Check the chat quick before beginning. Love your rant, Holly. No need to say sorry.
It is no understatement to say that Antarctica is a land of secrets and great mystery.
This is Antarctica, nearly 6 million square miles of ice-covered wasteland.
With reports of many world leaders curiously convening there in recent years, there's been a renewed rash of rumors running wild about supernatural occurrences, ancient alien civilizations, hollow earth, and even races of human hybrids. The only thing that's clear, though, is that much of what's actually going on in Antarctica has been and continues to be hidden. Will it ultimately remain that way? Here's what we found.
Though Antarctica was only officially discovered in modern times since the early 1800s, a curious and tantalizing fragment from a 1513 trade map created by the Ottoman Empire appears to show Antarctica connected to South America and supporting a warm, ice-free coastline with resources to sustain a lot more life. Though experts have, of course, debunked its imaginative suggestions and downplayed its significance ever since. Yet while most have general faith in the map-making of modern experts, it may be significant that the actual satellite images of what officials claim is a fully explored continent are actually composited together in a mosaic with a gaping hole in the middle around the South Pole. This is supposedly the truest picture of Antarctica that we're given, courtesy of the NASA Landsat program, which admittedly continually replaces and edits the composite, including when whiteout strikes. So the question that remains is, are we seeing what's really there? These satellite images are often stunning and give us a photorealistic picture of our planet, but like a video game with convincing graphics, satellite images are still only a representation of what's really there. They have flaws, and like all maps, the images simply aren't the actual territory. That may seem like a nitpicky point, but it's an important distinction to make, especially when we see large portions of what look like painted over or blurred out areas of the continent where bases are supposed to be located. Considering even super secretive Area 51 shows up pretty clear on Google Earth, you have to ask yourself, what's really in Antarctica that in 2017 we still supposedly don't have sophisticated enough technology for the general public to see it?
Yeah, very suspicious there. Why are they blurring the bases on Antarctica? They don't even blur Area 51. And why don't we know more about Antarctica at this point? And why isn't it more common that people are going there to explore things?
Investigations that West Antarctica and East Antarctica are actually two continents separated by an under-ice channel have largely been upheld. The Transantarctic Mountains and the chain of mountains up the Palmer Peninsula connect with the Andes Range, nearly touching South America where they were once connected by a land bridge. The questions began as soon as Antarctica was quote-unquote found. Have they, or will they, unearth something significant from humanity's past? Despite being told the entire continent is basically an icy, barren wasteland where hardly anything could survive or thrive, with no native human population other than visiting scientists.
Freezing wastes without people, without life, without vegetation. Nature's most formidable challenge to man.
Earlier reports show this is simply not the case.
All the way back in 1893, Captain Larson reported discovering petrified wood and worms on Seymour Island, as well as a captivating area with dozens of clay balls placed on top of what looked like pillars, which had the appearance of having been made by the hand of man. But these were later dismissed as basalt that happened to collapse into the appearance of carefully sculpted clay balls on top of pillars. Between 1928 and 1930, then Commander Richard Byrd completed the first of 5 major modern expeditions to explore the Antarctic, and right away his team were captivated by evidence that there had once been a warmer climate while they were surveying vast tracts of otherwise icy land at the bottom of the earth. This expedition, which cost $400,000, was financed by Edsel Ford and John D. Rockefeller Jr., among others. A 1930 article on Byrd's first mission noted, quote, "They expect in time to solve what is perhaps the world's greatest mystery, the existence of extensive vegetation of the vast uplands near the South Pole thousands of years ago, noting sufficient geological evidence to prove that at one time Antarctica was once warm enough to support at least a rich vegetable life. In 1947, the U.S. Navy claimed they found a place they named the Bungar Oasis, though it may have been explored earlier. The Soviets established a research station there during their expedition in 1956 at the now-defunct Polish A.B. Dabrowski Polar Station, in a fascinating 200-square-mile iceless area. At the same time, it was noted that the Russians moved so much equipment and supplies into the oasis that Australian and New Zealand diplomats were convinced they may be setting up permanent air and submarine bases there.
No wonder that one of the most compelling anomalies spotted on satellite images of Antarctica is only 35 miles from the Soviet base, in what appears to many to be a domed metal lid over some sort of underground entrance. In the meantime, no one has even confirmed or fully debunked the suspicions of conspiracy theorists on what this image even shows. Throughout further wide-scale explorations in the 40s and 50s, scientists on military expeditions reported finding ice-free oases with waterfalls cascading down rocky cliffs into dry valleys containing freshwater lakes on the interior of the continent, mountain ranges reaching thousands of feet above icy wastes, fossilized trees, and even the remains of petrified forests. In 1957, the U.S. military acknowledged...
That's interesting. So could there be a lot of resources, perhaps, and it's not as just this mound of ice, this block of ice, as many people believe it is? What is the strategic importance that so many countries want to be involved in control of Antarctica? Could they be hiding perhaps an interior structure through that, what that image was showing there? Who knows?
Finding at least 2 other oasis locations in Antarctica only a few hundred miles from the South Pole, both free of ice and large enough to house entire air bases. But the military wouldn't disclose the locations to prevent other nations from potentially establishing bases there. These oases reportedly have a radically different climate from the rest of the continent, places free of ice and snow where the soil can reach temperatures of 77 degrees Fahrenheit at midday, and warm winds blow over freshwater lakes where strange specimens grow. While traversing the interior, a seismologist gave his account in 1958 of coming across a fresh lake 100 yards across with pinkish flowers growing in the bottom of it, which he could not identify. Experts have concluded these areas could sustain year-round human settlements, yet these highly contrasted landscapes are often difficult to spot when browsing through satellite imagery for whatever reason.
Antarctica's past life as a tropical oasis is further upheld by the discovery of geothermal heated lakes, where almost any form of life could have survived and even continued up until this point, even while the rest of the continent froze over. The Russians at Vostok Station confirmed the discovery of a huge freshwater lake buried nearly 2 miles under the ice cap that they named Lake Vostok. It has attracted a great deal of attention ever since they've successfully drilled through the ice cap and collected active biological samples of living bacteria from a liquid lake that has otherwise been an isolated ecosystem for what scientists claim is as much as 15 million years. Located at the so-called South Pole of Cold, Lake Vostok is nearly as big as Lake Ontario, and at 6,000 square miles in surface area, 160 miles in length, and 30 miles of width, it measures to an astounding depth of more than 2,600 feet at some points. Its scientists claim they've found more than 3,500 life forms, as well as rich fossil evidence from a time that they've up until now known nothing about. Even more curious, however, was the confirmed discovery of a huge magnetic anomaly on the east coast of this underground lake that spans a vast 65 by 47 miles. Mainstream scientists hypothesized that a thinning of the Earth's crust at that location caused the anomaly, while others suggested a meteorite hit there, while still others suggest that the dimensions of such a significant magnetic anomaly could signify a lost city on the shores of the underground lake. With so much secrecy shrouding Antarctica, do you think the public would be told if something were found there? Interesting.
Could there be secret underground bases going on in Antarctica? Could there be other areas of our reality beyond Antarctica that they're hiding? Hard to say. Interesting to think about.
It parallels the plot to the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Scientists on the moon unearth a vast psychomagnetic anomaly that proves to be a monolithic signal device from an unseen extraterrestrial race. Hundreds of these subglacial lakes are known to exist, and most remain still unexplored. However, when scientists drilled into the ice cap of a much shallower and smaller subglacial lake known as Lake Willans, they found living jellyfish, crustaceans, and even 8-inch translucent pink fish, and what they said was an old ecosystem eroding from the ice hovering above the lake. These finds and more continue to fuel speculation, as they have over the past century, that Antarctica is holding on to secret links to mankind's past, and possibly the remnants of ancient civilizations which could have resided there in warmer times.
Despite the appearance of being completely peaceful and solely dedicated to international cooperative scientific research, and despite the public being repeatedly told for decades that Antarctica officially holds, quote, no military value, the massive continent and its surrounding islands in the polar region are of great strategic significance. The place doesn't just lay idle and ownerless, and this surrounds perhaps the biggest secret of Antarctica, an open and rather obvious one. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty, signed by a dozen nations that include the US, Argentina, Australia, Chile, New Zealand, Norway, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom, put in place the appearance of a harmonious international atmosphere where Cold War hostilities are rejected and peace is permanent. But in reality,
Why are all these countries forming a treaty around what appears to just be a barren ice land area with not a lot of resources and not a lot of strategic significance? What is going on with that?
In reality, major military forces remain embedded there, outwardly serving as the custodians of man's activities on the continent. And it remains true with now 53 signatories. Significantly, the 1959 treaty immediately followed the 1957-1958 International Geophysical Year, which organized dozens of nations to participate in the Antarctic and other parts of the globe to establish permanent scientific bases and conduct unprecedented exploration and experimentation. The recommendation to make 5758 an IGY event was initiated by astrophysicist Dr. James Van Allen, who was working with the Navy to test his developing theories about the geomagnetic forces that surround the planet, including the intense bands of harmful radiation that bear Van Allen's name. Meteorologist and Navy contractor Harry Wexler was working closely on this research as well, and was appointed chief U.S. scientist for the International Geophysical Year, which created a dual pretext for upper atmosphere tests and weather experiments that served both military and scientific interests, and for creating a permanent military backbone that could provide continuous support for bases, transport, and logistics.
The main job that faced the Seabees during the second year at Antarctica was the building of 5 new bases. Each of these stations would supply vital information to the various scientific projects of the IGY program.
Science gave the U.S., Russia, and Great Britain's military the justification needed for a permanent mission in the South Pole.
Operation Deep Freeze was commenced by the U.S. in 1955, 2 years before the International Geophysical Year, sending thousands of naval and Air Force troops, as well as militarized construction units from the Navy Seabees, to carve out permanent bases to support the scientific effort.
In less than 1 month, pilots of EX-6 mapped and photographed over 1 million square miles of territory.
Operation Deep Freeze created a never-ending permanent mission for the military amid a climate of international cooperation. The opportunity for cover and secrecy was astounding. In proposing the bases, members of the U.S. National Security Council forced an improbable merger between their national military goals and the International Geophysical Year program, silencing early opposition from the scientific community via the recognition that a military-backed mission, channeled through the National Science Foundation, would bring nearly unlimited funds for the projects they had championed. albeit at the cost of quietly acknowledging that parallel military activities were taking place largely in secret.
The activities of Operation Deep Freeze 1, the Glacier, with Admiral Dufek aboard, made a notable cruise around the Antarctic continent. The purpose of this voyage was to locate suitable sites for more IGY stations to be established in later operations. The Glacier's cruise around the continent brought Deep Freeze 1 to a successful conclusion.
Under the treaty, territorial claims are not addressed, though new claims are prohibited. With the status quo on ice, the U.S., British, and Russian installations remain like Antarctica's other secrets, frozen from political interference. But this form of peace can be deceiving and belie anything lurking just beneath the surface. With the treaty not taking effect until 1961, Operation Deep Freeze was a huge preemptive military mobilization effort to establish a permanent foothold on the continent. The only real question is, how far did they get?
There have been many rumors about underground bases on Antarctica, but by their very virtue they are difficult to confirm, and as a result, legends, rumors, and imaginations run wild. And yet, there is solid evidence to support the idea that a significant military-industrial complex is indeed embedded underneath Antarctica's icy facade. Most of the early expeditions to Antarctica in the later 1800s and early 1900s were largely concerned with establishing claims and merely surviving the harsh environment. With improved technology, flight became viable, as did ice-breaking ships and specialized vehicles for ice-capped terrain. In the 1920s, U.S. Navy Admiral Richard E. Byrd achieved fame as the first person to fly over both the North and South Poles, though not without controversy. Byrd's first of 5 expeditions to Antarctica from 1928 to 1929 was privately sponsored by backers including the Rockefellers and Fords, seeking uranium, coal, and shale deposits, gold, copper, and other exploitable minerals, as well as locations to establish base camps. Byrd established
Rockefeller funding. That is one of the most powerful families in the world, who is definitely involved in the cult that is trying to control humanity.
Little America, among other camps, which was later plunged into the sea by the shifting ice. Byrd's second 1934 to 1935 expedition focused more on weather. Publicly, the expedition was mostly known for Byrd's dramatic wintering in alone at a meteorological station where he nearly died of carbon monoxide poisoning from a poorly vented stove, yet he lived to publish a best-selling account of it. Behind the drama, it was a major effort to study the relationship between seismic activity, geomagnetic forces, atmosphere, and weather. James Van Allen, who discovered the Van Allen radiation belts that bear his name, took part in Byrd's second expedition as assistant to the chief scientist, and later became a driving force in Antarctic weather experimentation, while Byrd helped the U.S. secure its claims there.
Hitler's right-hand man, Hermann Goering, personally signed off on Germany's third expedition to Antarctica, and its first since before World War I. This became the infamous Neuschwabenland Nazi expedition, launched in 1938 and completed officially in 1939, just before initiating war with Poland. It was to be a secret reconnaissance expedition, with only 33 members plus the ship's crew, following a German whaling expedition in
33 members, you say? Wink and nod to the conspiracy theory community. It is somewhat true that 33 is a recurring number in many ruling class narratives.
1937 to 38, it aimed ostensibly at increasing the production of fat for the coming war effort. However, the real mission was clearly to establish permanent bases for Nazi raids and other naval activities. The Nazis staked out claims and dropped flags from planes over a large 231,000 square kilometer area, taking some 16,000 aerial color photos, along with prospector data to support legal claims based on the right of exploration, utterly disregarding previous claims by Norway over Queen Maud Land. Finding out about the secret mission through their German diplomat, Norway quickly attempted to
Interesting. Like, why are these countries so seemingly invested in mapping out this territory and having shared control over it?
Annexed the territory by decree 3 days before the Nazi expedition even reached Antarctica. But it didn't deter Germany, who issued a decree in August 1939 after the mission, establishing a German Antarctic sector, officially called New Schwabenland. Less than a year later, in 1940, Germany had invaded and occupied both Norway and Queen Maud Land. Even mainstream historians admit officially that there is evidence of at least minor Nazi coastal bases in Antarctica, ones that were large enough to dock German battleships during the war. But there's no clear record of activities beyond that. Unofficially, rumors allege that several Nazi U-boats that disappeared from the records had carried top officials including Hitler to the South Pole after the war, and that a more extensive and permanent base existed. If this holds any truth, one possible location for a substantial fortress would have been the 200 square mile.
You hear that, guys? Hitler escaped to Antarctica. Very funny theory.
Ice-free Schermacher oasis, which the Nazis had first identified from the air, and which supported numerous international stations after the war. Either way, after their 1938-39 New Schwabenland expedition commenced, Admiral Byrd was sent to Antarctica from 39 to 40 on a U.S. government-sponsored mission to establish permanent bases, further exploration, and most assuredly to spy on Nazi efforts there. In turn, news of Nazi bases drove support for building more American bases there. Though modern scholars have tried to downplay the existence of Nazi bases, news reports of the time captured the concern, as this article highlights that, quote, the capture of a secret Nazi hideout proves valuable naval bases can be built in ice fields. It also stated, quote, there, hidden away in some undisclosed quarter of the Antarctic quadrant, a British naval patrol recently found a Nazi naval base. True, it was only of small dimensions, yet was sufficiently enough equipped to have repaired even the Graf Spee, referring to the notorious Nazi commercial raider that was attacking British commerce ships. A 1942 article asked U.S. naval bases in the Antarctic and began discussing, quote, the possibility of using the Antarctic continent as one of the jumping-off places for the great naval offensive that would wipe Japan's rising sun flag off the face of the southern seas. And it discussed how it would become a pivot from which we could guard and control both the South Atlantic and the South Pacific. Clearly, Antarctica had become an important military position. Admiral Byrd also made this point at the time of his 1940 expedition, saying, as we all know, the Panama Canal may be under attack someday. It may even be destroyed by a hostile power. The Navy has to think of such a possible eventuality. That is why Antarctica looms in strategic value.
The British formalized its efforts to surveil and counter Nazi presence in the Antarctic during World War II under Operation Tabarin, where they sought to establish major Antarctic bases. The name Tabarin references a famous charlatan and street performer from the 17th century who used trickery and guile to hawk snake oil cures and put on provocative acts. The mission sought to utilize any pretext to occupy key Antarctic islands and counter illegitimate Nazi claims in Queen Maud Land. The British saw it as a power play to stave off Axis domination of the southernmost routes, especially between South America's tip and the Upper Peninsula. Britain reported not only Nazi bases there, but vexing Japanese whaling expeditions as well, and a definitive move was needed to outmaneuver Nazi-friendly Argentina, who held the de facto claim to influence over the region. The British occupied several key positions, including Deception Island, a tiny donut-shaped piece of land known for having the only ideal sheltered anchorage in Antarctica, but also host to an active volcano under its calm waters, as well as Hope Bay, an ice-free coast on the tip of Palmer Peninsula, as well as the more northern Falkland Islands, which it had first claimed in 1908. In short, this is closely related to why Britain felt strongly enough about the place to fight a war with Argentina for the Falkland Islands in the 1980s, long after Britain's empire had supposedly faded. These strongholds and others were
Interesting. So I guess the official narrative they're going for why it's strategically important is to control the water travel around these areas. Not sure I buy that, but it's definitely interesting to consider why everyone felt this was so important and what it could potentially be being used for since then up to today.
necessary to defend the important passage routes between the South Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, vital to the commercial and military affairs of both Britain and America, as well as to contend for supremacy in Antarctica. In World War II, the British fired upon the Germans' notorious Graf Spee pocket battleship in 1939 during the Battle of River Plate. A previous report indicated that British believed the Graf Spee was docking at a covert base in Antarctica and raided its commercial vessels. Though it wasn't heavily damaged, the Graf Spee was forced to scuttle to Uruguay and abandon
That was called Deception Bay in the last thing. Very funny.
crew after its critical fuel cleaning system was destroyed. Captain Langsdorff committed suicide and dozens of people died. The quiet battle for control of the southern oceans had now cost blood. Under Tabarin, Britain tore down Argentinian flags and destroyed whaling stations that could supposedly be used by the Nazis and set up their own bases and stations to replace them. In the post-war era, Britain made fresh claims over the South Shetland Islands, the South Georgia Islands, and the Falkland Islands, even after the 1959 treaty. More secretly, the British built a significant base, known as Modheim Base, on the mainland of eastern Antarctica and in the general vicinity of the Nazis' new Schwabenland base in Queen Maud Land. An advanced base was also built in the ice-free portions of the mountains near the pyramid Nunatak, but it remains little known and obscure even on modern satellite images, utilizing underground tunnels to connect tiny research huts and a sophisticated system to protect the base from snow and ice damage over time. In fact, it is very hard to find any mentions or any information at all about the Modheim bases in newspapers after the mid-1950s.
It was with the assertion of British power on the southern continent that U.S. Admiral Richard E. Byrd launched Operation High Jump, and with the wartime conclusion of Operation Tabarin, British interest in the Antarctic essentially rolled over into Allied interest with the U.S., almost seamlessly continuing during the U.S.-led military invasion to conquer Antarctica. It was completely unprecedented. Admiral Richard Byrd and Rear Admiral Richard Cruzen led some 4,700 men and brought 13 Navy vessels, an icebreaker ship, an aircraft carrier, battleships, a state-of-the-art submarine, and a fleet of planes and helicopters developed for the extreme cold to surround the continent and establish new bases. This largest ever polar deployment served as an exercise for cold weather warfare to oppose communist aggression and came with the talking points of protecting against an enemy operating from the poles and able to mobilize very quickly. Thus, the U.S. intended to establish a permanent presence there. At the mission's conclusion, Byrd told reporters embedded with him, quote,
I guess people might be afraid of a country launching an attack from Antarctica and that catching you off guard or allowing them to attack you more easily, I suppose. Interesting to consider. But I'm enjoying this little documentary on Antarctica and the history of it so far. Pretty cool to look at how all this developed and how all the countries competed for dominance of the area.
Terrifying rate of speed at which our world is shrinking is the great object lesson. We can no longer believe that distance guarantees us safety, that oceans and poles will be our ever-protecting no man's land. If he could succeed in taking 4,000 young Americans into the cold and unknown Antarctic, that others could do the same as well. But Admiral Byrd was forced to retreat from the mission after only a few months. Newspaper accounts blamed the ice and the freezing up of the waterways, the same excuse mentioned ahead of time in papers before the expedition departed. Some have claimed that Byrd met a superior force that even possessed UFO aircraft that drove Byrd out of Antarctica. But this account is largely substantiated by a quote which attributed Admiral Byrd as saying, in case of a new war, the continental U.S. would be attacked by flying objects, which could fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. However, retrieval of the article this quote was said to appear in, dated March 5, 1947, and written by Lee Van Atta, an International News Service correspondent who accompanied the expedition, carried a different account with a few similarities from which grains of truth were plucked. It read, quote, Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd warned that the U.S. must guard against any future invasion by hostile aircraft from across the polar regions of the Earth, which bears a resemblance yet a different meaning from the phrase flying objects which could fly pole to pole.
That is interesting if Byrd did warn the public, if that is true. that he was worried about an attack from the Antarctic region on Western countries. What might he know that led to him developing that theory? And is it a true quote to begin with?
The Admiral declared, "It is no scare phrase, but a bitter reality to state that conflict, should it ever come again, will lash out at our nation over one or both poles." Byrd's warning was couched in the post-war narrative of a Soviet threat, which Byrd used after the war to justify cold weather, Cold War training near both poles, which Byrd initially oversaw. Lesser known is the fact that the U.S. followed up the very next year in 1947 to 48 with Operation Windmill, which continued survey operations and even more significantly furthered the study of electromagnetic effects on weather at the South Pole, though the mission was also aborted early. The U.S. hesitated and backed off from a planned Operation High Jump 2 due to international pressure and suspicion about the militarization of the South Pole. Instead, it opted for the peaceful approach of Operation Deep Freeze that began a few years later in 1955, just ahead of the international treaty. It should be noted, just after World War II, the first nuclear war, that it was mentioned multiple times in the papers that not only was Antarctica a probable source of coal.
We've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
But also of vast stores of uranium.
Okay, so it looking like there's potential vast resources to be had from the Antarctic land. That could be a motivation.
Which multiple countries, including Britain, were down there in search of.
Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter. Well, it was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
The year after World War II ended, at the same time papers were quietly announcing in tiny articles buried in their back pages that Antarctica might be hiding large stores of uranium under its ice. A law and diplomacy professor at Tufts College was warning that the new free areas of the world, like Antarctica would become under the 1959 treaty only a dozen years later, should be placed under the control of the United Nations, quote, thereby establishing the first tiny toehold of world government in practice. Professor Leo Gross went on to say that the suspected presence of uranium in Antarctica necessitates the UN to act right away to, quote, start a pool of world government into which the nations could one day jump themselves, as many believe they will have to do before lasting world order can be established.
Is it any secret? Is there uranium there? That would be the only thing that would be practical to actually go after, I suppose. Everything else would be economically unfeasible, wouldn't it?
Well, as we recklessly expend our resources, the time will come and we'll have to go after that stuff down there. Well, you know, I avoided what you said about uranium. I'm not sure about that. I don't want to have the world fighting over the Antarctic.
And Robert, is there a competition among other nations to try to get information about Antarctica and possibly to secure some of these resources?
Well, yes. There are 7 nations very much interested.
During the construction of these major installations, tunnels were dug between buildings. Tunnels were dug for supplies and utility units and for specialized equipment. Underground entrances and bases were expanded and reinforced to protect against the harsh weather. Were there secret underground military facilities constructed during or after this time? Were there any banned weapons tests or military activities and installations that went fully operational before the Antarctic Treaty set in? The answers are mostly silent, like the vast, icy wastelands that have intrigued so many searchers.
Below the surface of a giant ice cap, a city is buried.
Some very interesting disclosures were declassified about U.S. military installations in Greenland, which took place in the 1960s with the cooperation of Denmark and NATO.
This is the story of Camp Century, the city under ice.
While feeding European allies and the American people a highly publicized cover story about the triumphs over nature and building an underground city for research under the ice at Greenland's Camp Century,
the basic concept was simple. A system of 23 trenches would be dug into the ice cap and then covered with steel arches and snow. Branching off the main communication trench would be a series of lateral trenches housing complete research, laboratory, and test facilities, modern living quarters and recreation areas, and a complex of support facilities.
The Pentagon kept its real activities a secret. Only later did the truth about top-secret Project Iceworm surface. The Pentagon was attempting to put in place mobile nuclear launching sites that would utilize thousands of miles of tunnels to station ICBMs from theoretically random positions, all without Denmark's knowledge or consent.
Later, an escape hatch would be placed at the end of a small wooden form for an emergency exit.
Were similar installations attempted in Antarctica? Like Greenland's Camp Century, Antarctica's McMurdo and Byrd stations also featured a nuclear reactor, as well as under-ice tunnels.
16 of these escape hatches were strategically located throughout the various tunnels.
The inconvenient fact is that the U.S. lied to its international allies about nuclear weapon sites in Greenland, so it's fair game to question whether they did the same in the seemingly peaceful and cooperative atmosphere of frigid ice and penguin research.
The same questions apply to Admiral Byrd's equally publicized Operation Icebox, a tentative plan to partner with private corporations and bury food surplus in Antarctica. Perhaps it was just another cover for building an extensive underground tunnel system. It was talked about in interviews and papers from the time, but seemingly never materialized. This diagram shows how they can effortlessly dig a continuous trench, then place shipping containers and rebury for long-term storage. The article advertised, quote, "We plan to bury a cache of 100 loaves of bread every year over the next 100 years. We won't be here to finish the experiment, but our great-grandchildren will. We could create a permanent icebox for our food surpluses in the Antarctic, save on storage, and contribute a great act of international goodwill." Again, Greenland may be a blueprint for what was attempted in Antarctica. It should also be noted that the 1961 Atomic Energy Commission had completed an extensive labyrinth of underground tunnels in the Nevada desert for the purposes of underground nuclear testing. The agency told the AP at the time, quote, "The tunnels are being constructed for any use deemed necessary if and when the administration decides to resume nuclear testing."
During Operation High Jump, an Arctic submarine laboratory was dispatched to Antarctica from a California naval base where it tested under-ice operations with great success. This was a pivotal moment for underwater and polar warfare. Prior to launch, Admiral Byrd contacted Dr. Waldo Lyon, the top naval warfare submarine guy at their San Diego base, to ask him if there was any research he wanted to do in conjunction with the expedition. Lyon asked to test a new submarine in the ice-filled waters, and so they did. This Antarctic deployment was the first major field trial for subarctic submarine conditions, with success leading to new capabilities such as breaking through ice to surface and launching a nuclear warhead from underwater in range of Cold War targets anywhere on the map. Moreover, thousands of men were deployed to DEW-line distant early warning stations in North Canada and Greenland, and to submarines and aircraft patrolling the Bering Sea and northern Arctic waters under training originally supervised by Admiral Byrd. No further military tests were ever admitted in Antarctica, despite a massive militarization on the ice. And what came of the breakthroughs in ice core drilling, ice melting cryobots, deep-sea sea lab experiments designed for Arctic waters, and the 500-meter depths of its continental shelf? All of this must have made Antarctica's frozen abyss more accessible. Yet has anything significant been found? Have any bases been constructed there using tunnel boring systems, utilizing natural caves or geothermal hotspots? It's a big continent, so it's a very intriguing and perhaps plausible maybe. Again, Greenland may be a blueprint for what was attempted in Antarctica.
Another little-known and underexplained role in Antarctica is that of NASA engineers, who sent units to train for conditions that might be found in space. Numerous press reports in the 50s and 60s made the point of comparing Antarctica's conditions to that of the Moon and Mars, cold, unforgiving, and remote. High-ranking officials, including Wernher von Braun, conducted special training missions there, including one to prepare for tunneled...
That's interesting that NASA was training in Antarctica in the 50s and claiming that it was similar to the Moon in conditions.
underground bases on the Moon. like the ones in Antarctica. Other NASA reports have remarked on the similar mountainous terrain. But did these training missions for space travel also double as an opportunity to upgrade and expand military bases under peaceful pretext in the region? Did NASA take advantage of the reclusive area as a secret launching base?
Yeah, you have to wonder if they're giving the public one story about what they're doing in Antarctica while actually doing another thing. Definitely possible.
How many rockets were being test-fired here? And what was their real purpose?
And in early fall 1963, there were claims made that a nuclear bomb was detonated on the Antarctic continent. But as it did not register fallout, it was believed to have been set off either in the upper atmosphere where previous tests had been conducted or underneath the ice sheet. But the news was smothered. Despite the fact that this August 1963 blast, or test, was detected 2 days before the U.S. and Russia signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the White House ordered the detection of the explosion to be kept quiet until after the Senate voted on ratifying the grand sweeping treaty. The DoD originally denied that any explosion took place, and even tried to pass it off as a natural phenomenon before later conceding that it had in fact happened. The U.S. quietly pointed fingers at the Soviet Union, and months before his assassination, JFK decided to call for inspections of Russian bases in Antarctica under the terms of the 1959 treaty. Though the U.S. military initially denied reports of a nuclear weapon being detected, the Navy quietly admitted that this was the case, immediately the day after Kennedy's assassination. We found it mentioned on page 12A, following page after page of detailed and emotional JFK assassination coverage. After that, the issue seemed to disappear from public view. Did the Russians, the United States, or a joint scientific venture between multiple countries set off a nuke in the upper atmosphere of the poles in order to create an artificial EMP or aurora effect? If they did...
That's interesting that was being reported around the time of JFK's death. Of them potentially having nuclear weapons or setting them off in Antarctic.
It may have been allowed under the Antarctic Treaty, if and only if it was purely for science, and all member states agreed. If so, whatever they found or tested has been kept entirely under wraps.
The absolute biggest secret of all in Antarctica is the electromagnetic energy that surrounds and saturates life on planet Earth. How, precisely, does the magnetic energy from the poles create and modify weather? Why are the poles frozen? Why a huge landmass at one pole and an open ring of ocean at the other? Could the poles shift suddenly, rapidly changing climate and destroying existing life? Could science engineer the artificial melting of the poles in order to extrapolate the riches and resources buried underneath? Scientists, Antarctic explorers, and military figures alike have discussed how weather is made and controlled at the South Pole. Along with the accumulation of 90% of the world's ice and 60% of its freshwater reserves, which also controls oxygen content in the atmosphere. And bird among...
That's interesting. Could Antarctica be used as a strategic point to modify the weather globally?
Among others, has hinted at controlling the weather, something the Navy has always had a deep interest in. They established Camp Sky High, the first upper atmosphere VLF summer station on Antarctica at the base of the Antarctic Peninsula. It carried miles of wires spread out over the ice and sought to stimulate artificial auroral effects that would reciprocate with its conjugate radio site in Quebec, Canada.
Resembling a gigantic peeled orange, this Rowan dome was assembled from prefabricated curved sections. Inside, it contained special equipment used for recording weather conditions. Another building, unusual in its dimensions, was the Aurora Airglow Tower.
Skull and Bones journalist and op-ed extraordinaire William F. Buckley visited the South Pole and remarked on its use for weather control, interacting with scientists studying hydrodynamics of the Earth's core, as well as geomagnetic effects on weather.
Harry Wexler, the chief U.S. scientist who was experimenting with weather control, was put in charge of the International Geophysical Year in 1958. This was the same year that Harry Wexler saw his plans for bombarding the ionosphere with nuclear weapons undergo live tests in the Navy's 1958 Operation Argus. creating an artificial aurora burst hundreds of miles away at magnetic correlates from the firing positions.
The Earth itself is a magnet. It acts as a dipole surrounded by a field of magnetic force. We see that the magnetic field extends a great distance from the Earth. Any one of these field lines can be thought of as lying in a shell.
Advances in understanding the electromagnetic shield that protects the planet lent themselves to military attempts to manipulate the weather. The Navy confirmed that it could black out satellite and radio communications with high-altitude explosions, eventually creating an EMP. What were their plans at the South Pole? Wexler was deep into this weather manipulation stuff, and leading the 1957 to 58 International Geophysical Year as chief U.S. scientist is very telling of the research objects of Antarctica. In his papers, Wexler had detailed specific designs for planetary-scale manipulation of the Earth's climate using short and long-term radiation and inducing artificial worldwide climate change. Another of his plans was to set off enough hydrogen bombs in the Arctic Circle to melt the ice and increase the world's temperature. Or conversely, Wexler proposed launching a fine powder into equatorial orbit to reduce the Earth's temperature with permanent Saturn-like rings. He also formulated a detailed plan for bombarding the atmosphere with chlorine or bromine and punching a hole in the stratospheric ozone layer, proven to work in military tests, only to oppose the same plan later. Wexler was on a working vacation at the elite Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute with which he was affiliated when he died unexpectedly of a heart attack in 1962 at the young age of 51. Just months earlier, he gave a final speech to Woods Hole titled On the Possibilities of Climate Control, explaining the mechanisms not just to seed a few clouds, but to permanently control the Earth's climate. The terms of the 1959 Antarctic Treaty, barring military activities and preserving the world south of the 60-degree south latitude line for science, does not apply to U.S. Navy operations on the open seas. If any kind of atmospheric heater, HARP device, or SBX-1 radar device, or even a nuclear submarine is used to manipulate or alter weather offshore, there's no jurisdiction over its activities there outside of military doctrine and secret government control.
And then there's the totality of it all. Support for international scientific research trumps all other considerations in Antarctica. Or perhaps it has provided the ultimate cover for maintaining a massive, permanent, off-limits continent that is 1.5 times the size of the U.S., and within which they can run black projects away from the prying eyes of almost everyone else on the planet. Between the big push with Operation High Jump in 1946, where at least 190 Americans were left behind to continue operations, on through the next 15 years when the U.S. Navy and Air Force became the de facto custodians of the southern continent, the military took responsibility for at least 5 American permanent research stations with underground facilities, multiple atomic reactors, living quarters, and supply and transport for thousands of scientists around the continent. Great Britain had multiple expeditions to Antarctica during the late 1800s, the early 1900s, in World War I, and with classified operations during World War II, after which they never left, and their actions on the continent during that time are even less publicized. Russia, then the Soviet Union, has maintained permanent residence down there since World War II as well. And again, in the spirit of international scientific cooperation, Antarctica never saw the Cold War the rest of the world lived in fear of for decades. We're told the whole place is one big global community, where scientists from every nation get together and sing Kumbaya and do science while war is a non-existent concept. We were promised enough coal to power the world for decades, enough food to feed the whole world stored freshly down there for 100 years, shorter flight routes, and a new spot for tourism. While you can go there if you have enough money for the ridiculously expensive tickets, to visit the very edges, or to take a flight that never lands, or special permission from a treaty country granted for scientific purposes, the majority of humans on this planet will never get to go to Antarctica in their lifetimes. Why not? The real reason is not just to protect the penguins.
Indeed. Very interesting video there. Lots to think about. I think in these coming years, we definitely want to demand more clarity on exactly what is going on in Antarctica, why it is so strategically important to everyone, go over some of the concerns about what could be being hidden from us and why we deserve to know what's going on there. It's just all very suspicious, and my intuition is that they are hiding a lot of information from the public about what's going on in Antarctica. I mean, I guess that's obvious, but I think it's just important that the public pushes to figure out what's going on here, because we know we can't trust these psychopaths in power, and if they're conspiring on a land that they're not allowing anyone else to go, we need to figure out exactly what they're doing and how they could potentially be weaponizing this against us. But yeah, I liked learning a lot there. I haven't done a ton of research, as I said, on Antarctica, so coming in that more fresh, just like you guys, but learned a lot there. Very interesting. Next, we are going to get into our psychological warfare bit of the evening in media and entertainment. First, I wanted to show this 60 seconds clip of a Mossad agent who, I forget when the 60 Minutes interview aired, but here it is right here. We'll watch it.
We create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay. We're the directors. We're the producers. We're the main actors. And the world is our stage.
This is Mossad.
So, I know for sure that this is an actual interview that they ran, and this is exactly what he said. Even if this sort of sounds like AI and like not true. I've looked into this personally. A lot of people talked about this. You might wonder, like, if this is really true, why are they going on 60 Minutes and telling the world about it? Who knows? But everything that I've concluded throughout my research over the last 7 or 8 years, this is the conclusion that I'm coming to more and more and more, that they are basically conditioning what the public believes and conditioning their behavior through this psychological warfare, which functions exactly like entertainment pretty much, and all the ways to manipulate us manipulate our emotions through entertainment. These are the same people that are making our movies and everything that are scripting what they call the reality to the general public, with people who are following orders and acting primarily. So we'll watch that one more time.
We create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay. We're the directors. We're the producers. We're the main actors. And the world is our stage.
This is Mossad's old office. Its motto from Proverbs 24:6 says in so many words, wage war through deception and trickery.
And this is how they have been able to conquer and control the West and therefore the world, at least up to this point, is primarily through deception and primarily through media and entertainment. So this is going to be like a main theme of my channel, covering psychological warfare. I think it's one of the most important things that the public understands in order to combat what they're doing to us. And I will check the chat quick, see if anyone else has commented. How's life, Adam? Says Anon, you in Ontario and playing any poker in this pool? Hey Anon, good to see you. I assume you're from my poker streams. Yeah, I am in Ontario still. I'm not playing as much poker lately, just focused on other things, but I might get back into it and try the Ontario-only pools at some point. I've heard the Ontario-only pools are actually quite good. As you know, poker is not quite as easily profitable these days, but I might get back into it at some point. But after doing it for so long, I just needed a break from it, just on a spiritual level. And yeah, so I'm on a break from it currently. Hope you've been doing well though, Anon. Papa, good to see you. Before we get into the psych warfare section here, I just wanted to quickly go over the news that Epstein files were released that mentions Trump in them. They say the dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Who knows what that means? I mean, I don't trust Trump. I think Trump is he's just playing the controlled opposition. And I mean, if people are still trusting Trump at this point, they are coping really badly because, in my opinion, there's no good reason to trust that he has good intent for us anymore, especially after he denied the Epstein files and a number of other terrible things he's done as well. I hope that most people stop looking to him as the answer that we need when clearly he is not going to help us in any significant way. And it's possible that he is involved with the Epstein stuff. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Oh, I also want to share this guy's work here. This guy does great work investigating Kabbalah, Christianity, Jewish intellectual influence over our society, and so forth. Link here for anyone. There's probably way more people than are mentioned. Yeah, enjoy the read, Holly. Not sure exactly what you mean there. There's way more people than are mentioned. Not sure what the context of that is. But yeah, that's an interesting read for anyone if they want to while we go over some psychological warfare stuff. Very exciting. So the first video that we're going to watch, I'm going to bring to your attention a new creator here. I don't think I've shown him on any of my streams thus far, but he is one of the top experts, in my opinion, at the psychological warfare in media and entertainment. And he does a good video here going over, as the title says here, the mechanics of deception. So, without further ado, we're going to get into this video. Hope you guys enjoy.
I've heard it repeated time and time again that in order for the ruling class, the satanic ruling class, to do something to the unsuspecting slave class, that they must first telegraph it. They have to tell you about what they're going to do to you before they do it. I've heard lots of people say this, but I've never actually heard anyone explain where this idea comes from. I mean, if you really think about it, the idea isn't a new one. Think about how many fables there are in which a man makes a deal with the devil, only to discover later that they were so wrapped up in the gift that the devil was bestowing on them that they didn't pay close enough attention to the fine print of the contract. You see, the devil, despite the power of his seductive nature, it seems, at least in mythology, that even he has to fully inform his prey of the consequences of accepting his gift before he can take their soul. So maybe this is the origin behind the idea that the ruling class has to fully inform their victims before they can feast on their souls. Maybe this is some kind of twisted moral code that they feel alleviates them from any kind of wrongdoing. Maybe it's some kind of twisted logic that justifies in their heads their predatory existence. There's really no way to know if this really is the modus operandi of the evil that's managed to pool and congeal at the top of the power hierarchy. But
yeah, all good points. The ruling class is, by my estimation, very into esoteric side of things, the occult side of things, putting their symbolism all over the place as a way to signal to each other that they are in control, that they control what everyone's looking at, what everyone believes. I think part of it is just they get a sick satisfaction by rubbing it in our faces. Well, we clap for what they give us for films and music. We clap to the propaganda. We enjoy the propaganda. Basically enjoying the weapons being deployed against us, and this gives the ruling class a sort of sick pleasure that we're so stupid that we just think that we're being entertained by a movie when really we're having our thoughts and behavior programmed over time. Sort of a humiliation, in a way. The ruling class is very obsessed with humiliation rituals and humiliating their enemies. So also by showing us what they're doing to us in a way that just humiliates you even more if you still don't understand what's being done to you.
If it is, what then is the fine print that we're all missing? Where do they telegraph the consequences of allowing them to rule? Where is this obscure legal language that describes in detail exactly how they plan to ruin us? Some people suggest that the ruling class utilizes the same methods to communicate these hidden clauses in the social contract, the same way they communicate a lot of things they don't want to openly admit. They use Hollywood. And probably because there are so many instances that when examined closely, it does appear as if that's exactly what's happening. You know, the age-old argument of, is it art imitating life or life imitating art, kind of gets pushed aside when some of these movies seem to depict future events with such stunning detail and accuracy that it seems that the only way this could happen is if the artists themselves had prior knowledge, or as crazy as it might sound to a lot of people, maybe they're even instrumental in the planning and the execution. One example of this is the film Wag the Dog. Wag the Dog is so close to reality, it doesn't even seem like it's the ruling class telegraphing what it is they intend to do. It seems like it's an instance of the ruling class rubbing it in our faces. Wag the Dog was released in 1997, and that's important to know because this was well before 9/11 happened, and it predates any popular understanding that there was a deep state by decades. This is also a time before the internet was widely available to the public, so almost everyone got their news from the networks owned by billionaires that sometimes act like quasi-government agencies, like CNN, or newspapers that are owned by billionaires who have very big contracts with the CIA. Wag the Dog was produced and directed by Barry Levinson, who just so happens to party in the Hamptons with Bill Clinton. That's a significant point, not just because it shows his deep state ties.
And we commonly see this, these big directors, these big people who are creating some of the big propaganda pieces for the Western public. They are seen having connections to the elite in society. The masterminds of the propaganda in entertainment, I would argue, are also the masterminds of planning out the narratives of what they tell the public is true. The politics we see, the left versus the right in government, fighting with each other, everything we see in Congress and such, these are all, in my opinion, controlled people who are doing as they're told and are putting on an act, doing as they're told, trying to convince the public that this is a legitimate system. As long as the public continues to believe this is a legitimate system, the politics and voting and whatnot, then we cannot do anything to escape this situation. They always control both of the primary people who you're voting for. Whoever wins, it's just going to simply be a different storyline, a different narrative that they give to the public. Both are going to lead to the same long-term goal against you. They always tell you, we need to save democracy. There's an attack on democracy. They are literally putting on a play for the public, trying to manipulate your perception and try to keep you in a system that they call democracy that is guaranteed to destroy you long term because it's not operating how they tell you that it's operating. It is a fake system. It is a covert tyranny. And I would argue a covert tyranny is much more dangerous than an overt tyranny, where it's very obvious what they're doing is evil. The problem is today, you see all these leftists defending this evil system. They've been convinced that the system they're defending is what is good. And the people like us, who are trying to destroy democracy and are far-right people, we're the evil ones. They have to have the leftists believe that we're evil because we're the ones that represent a threat to their system over humanity. We're the ones who correctly identify exactly what they're doing to us. So they need to use their propaganda machines to dehumanize us in the leftist consciousness. This is how it plays out. You really want to be careful about dehumanizing such a large percentage of the public. We saw what happened when Charlie Kirk died. That has been a result of the decades of dehumanization of anyone with similar ideas to him. Most people with ideas like Charlie Kirk, ideas like mine, are good people who, simply put, in my opinion, have a better understanding of how these systems work and what is actually going to reduce suffering overall long term. And leftist ideology has been programmed into them, in my opinion. And it's meant to sound like pretty, to sound high morality, but because it does not, it's not accurate. It does not have a correct understanding of the brutal nature of reality. Because of that inaccuracy, it actually causes behavior that is self-destructive. It doesn't have the correct understanding of reality, simply put. And that's why it leads to greater suffering overall. Whereas beliefs that I'm promoting here, I believe, have a greater understanding of reality. And even though they may seem harsher on the surface, they actually, in the end, reduce suffering for everyone due to that greater understanding. And people don't want to believe that our reality is as cruel as it is in many different ways, as unequal as it is. But the longer we pretend that everything is an idealistic version of the world, the longer we reject accepting how reality is, and that actually we're not equal, men and women are not equal, different races are not equal. They have different strengths and weaknesses. They're all equally human. But your worth as a human should not come from how intelligent you are, or if you're really good at science, or if you're really good at whatever skill. And we need to stop applying human value on things like that, so that we can comfortably recognize that different groups have different skills and that we're all equally human. We need to just get to a place where we put truth first over beliefs that sound good on the surface. All right, continuing on here, we're going to explore this movie and what the propaganda message was on the public and what the social engineers may have been thinking during the creation of this movie.
And his ties to the ruling class, but because this coziness that Hollywood producers have with the ruling class, something Levinson is deeply aware of firsthand, is reflected and depicted in the film that he produced and directed. So if there's anyone equipped to give an accurate accounting of this, it's going to be Barry Levinson. In the context of today, it's easy to look back at Wag the Dog and kind of perceive the opening of this film as laughing in the audience's face. Even the title itself could be viewed as part of this obscured legal language of the ruling class. Wag the Dog, on its face, just seems like an entertaining wordplay. It's not immediately apparent that there's any deeper meaning to it. Most of the public will see these words and just think it's a humorous but meaningless phrase. And so the film, in its first few moments, tells you exactly what it means, knowing full well that by doing so, it's not giving up any secrets to the sedated audience. It's simply giving them what they crave: amusement. Why does a dog wag its tail? The film asks with pleasant, unassuming serif font with patriotic yet folksy music kind of playing in the background. Because the dog is smarter than its tail, the answer comes. If the tail were smarter, the tail would wag the dog. They are telling you in just a few words, in just the first few seconds of the film, that the way that the world works is that the intelligent manipulate the unintelligent. That is the meaning of the title. But it goes beyond that. Since the title is Wag the Dog, not Wag the Tail, they're also saying that what you perceive as being the intelligent force behind world events is the complete opposite of reality. And they're smugly telling you this literally in black and white before the movie even starts. And before they tell you how they do it. If this film is telegraphing, it's doing it plain as day. As those...
And they always seek to run an inversion of reality. It is a satanic inversion, fundamentally. This is why the leftist belief system that they push on society in order to help destroy us by inducing that self-destructive behavior, this is why this is an inversion of truth oftentimes. A direct inversion.
Who are behind the film are laughing in the faces of the audience before the movie even begins. And now that the filmmakers have had their little joke, the film now begins with a political ad in a presidential campaign. The ad is cheesy, and we gather from the equally cheesy slogan, "Don't change horses in midstream," that it is a re-election campaign. The ad is telling the American public, don't upset the status quo, just go with the president you have because it's the best you can do and you wouldn't want to upset things. We now go to the White House that has approved this ad. It's after hours and in the basement in a secret room. Robert De Niro is playing a crisis manager of sorts. It seems that the election is only days away, and the administration has just discovered that news that the president had sex with a young girl in the Oval Office is about to break. The president is in China on some sort of diplomatic trip, and the team has been assembled to deal with the crisis before the news breaks. The first thing Robert De Niro does is he tells the president's people to delay the president in China, tell the press that he's sick. He also tells them to begin spreading disinfo about some fictional B-3 bomber to create a fog around the president's trip to China and get the press talking about something unrelated to the scandal before it breaks. He also tells the administration to start rumors about a crisis brewing somewhere that he has yet to figure out the details on, but don't worry, he's on it, knowing full well the press will predictably parrot any talking points they put out directly or through deception. Next, we jump to a plane, and on the plane to LA to see a Hollywood producer to help him produce this crisis that will distract the American people from the scandal in the Oval Office. De Niro explains they can make a fake war because the American people, they'll believe whatever they see on TV. He talks about how nobody questioned the Gulf War. They just went along with whatever they were told. Now, this is pretty stunning because this film was made before it was widely known that much of the Gulf War was a farce, that this performance right here of a young woman claiming to be a doctor that witnessed Iraqi soldiers taking babies out of incubators and killing them was actually a big lie. It was a manufactured story literally written by a PR firm with lines delivered by the daughter of a Kuwaiti ambassador to help lie.
Classic atrocity propaganda here, where they manipulate the public into feeling a certain way in order to justify immoral actions against a population.
The American people into a war, something that, by the way, never led to any consequences. It's
also done with things like 9/11, of course.
Also, before the public knew of all the fake footage that CNN used during the war, quote-unquote war correspondents pretending to be under attack. Another thing that, again, no one got in trouble for. You and I know this now, but when Wag the Dog was released, the idea that the Gulf War had fictional components to it at the very least was an extremely fringe idea. The audience watching this in the theater was...
By the way, this is also why it is critical that we are able to question atrocities. Because everyone being conditioned to say anyone question... We've been conditioned to think that anyone questioning an atrocity is a bad person, because if this atrocity was true, then you questioning it would make all the people involved in that atrocity feel bad. And you think, okay, that's a reasonable perspective, right? But what you're missing here is that our ruling class are using these advanced strategies to manipulate us. If we are unable to question any tragedy, that gives them full power to exploit tragedy narratives that are untrue against the public indefinitely to accomplish whatever goals they have. It is understandable why people think that people who question atrocities are bad, but we need to have some of the public be able to question atrocities while not being called a bad person for it, if we want to avoid being manipulated by these false narratives of false atrocities. Or at least false in terms of, sometimes it's either completely not true, or sometimes the perpetrator who did it is just inverted.
Giggling at the idea that it was all just a play put on the public and thinking how, what an imaginative premise they have, when in reality, it's quite possible they were rubbing it in your face. There was a joke, but that joke was on you. De Niro's character goes to Hollywood to talk to a Hollywood producer played by Dustin Hoffman to convince him to help him with this deception they need to pull on the American people to try to distract them from the sex scandal. De Niro demonstrates the control he has over the press office by making a call and dictating what the press secretary should say while he's live at the podium. Again, this film was made in 1997, well before any kind of mini Bluetooth earpieces were available, and well before any accusations that debate participants might be using some kind of earpiece device. At the time, this technology was kind of science fiction-y, or at the very least, it was for the general public. This impresses Dustin Hoffman's character, and he of course agrees to help with the deception. De Niro tells Dustin Hoffman that they're going to have to fake a war with Albania. They choose Albania because Americans are so poorly educated by government schools, most couldn't find Alabama on a map, let alone Albania. So the American public will just think whatever the people on TV tell them to think. Right away, they start talking about how to market the war, how to make money on it. They bring up the Yellow Ribbon campaign from the first Gulf War and say that it was a manufactured movement that made them a lot of money selling overpriced yellow ribbons. I'm not aware of anyone who's actually researched this, but I would not be shocked if there was a kernel of truth in this. I hate knowing that that line in the movie likely generated a lot of lighthearted laughter in the theater as the audience watched in 1997. An audience that was probably giggling at how preposterous it was that something like that would or even could be faked. Nobody's laughing now. They also decide they need a reason for the war. They know Americans don't ask too many questions, so it doesn't have to be too elaborate. So in this movie that was made well before we were invading Iraq, looking for non-existent weapons of mass destruction, they decided to lie and claim that Albania has weapons of mass destruction. They hate us for our freedom, and they're going to try to destroy the great Satan that is the United States. Sound familiar? The newly assembled team also starts working on a song they can saturate the airways with once the manufactured war begins. Wars need theme songs that will bring the public together. After all, as they put it in the film, war is show business. Perhaps this also sounds familiar.
I watch CNN, but I'm not sure I can tell you the difference in Iraq and Iran.
But before they can play the songs in the airways, the first thing the team decides they need footage they can leak to the press. Fake footage that'll pull at the heartstrings of Americans. Again, this was made in 1997, decades before the public became aware of the fake footage of the Hollywood-promoted white helmets and the fake Syrian gas footage. In 1997, this was all a joke. They show how easily Hollywood puts together this fake footage of the war-torn Albania, with a young village woman holding a kitten. They argue about what cat should they use, or maybe they should use a dog. It's all just a giant joke. And it's all
the same people who mastermind all the films and TV shows and music are also and they understand how language and visuals influence the public. They understand how to cause certain emotions in them, basically how to manipulate their thoughts and behavior through these movies and TV shows and everything. And they bring that expertise into what they tell the public is actually real. And they manipulate them in many of the same ways. That's why the world is effectively a stage play.
Also a joke when Robert De Niro's character tells the actress, who is playing the Albanian woman, that if she tells anyone that she was involved in this production, they will kill her. The press, of course, obediently plays the fake footage on repeat to the American people, as we now know they have done over and over and over again in the past so many times.
It's a mass hypnosis strategy. It's language with the correct visuals, correct audio. You can easily condition the public consciousness in order to get them to support whatever your agenda is. And this is often by inverting the truth about the good and the evil within the narrative.
We may never know the extent of their deception or the lives that have been needlessly lost because of their lies. But that's okay, because in 1997, this was still all just a joke. Now that the American people have been thoroughly fooled, they've pulled off the deception, we're introduced to an idea that was considered completely insane in 1997. We are now introduced to the deep state. You see, the CIA and the NSA, they know there's no war in Albania, and they apprehend Robert De Niro's character, and they ask him to explain himself. And once again, we get more truth disguised as humor. Humor that the audience will laugh off and never take seriously, because to believe what is being discussed would destroy this mythical view they have of their country. Robert De Niro explains to the deep state that they need this fake war just as much as the president does. He tells them that if the American people feel safe and secure, that the deep state will get budget cuts. He tells them that they have to put the scare into the American people so that they keep giving them money. But don't worry, guys, this is all just a joke, right?
Yeah, they're framing this as, haha, imagine if things actually work this way. But actually, they're just telling you exactly how it works. They need to keep attacking the public on a psychological, on an emotional level, if they want to stay in power long term. And they understand this, and they are experts at crafting fake storylines in order to manipulate our decision making, in order to get us to support whatever is in their agenda.
A short time later, the conspirators hit a bump in the road when the senator who's running against the president catches wind that the war is being faked, so he goes on television and just declares that fighting has stopped and the war is now over. The election is still a few days away, so they need to stretch it out a little bit longer. They decide a good way to keep this going is by telling the American public that a hero soldier was left behind and is now caught behind enemy lines. They want to market this with a campaign, so they choose a soldier that has a name they can market. They pick the name Schumann, then they fake a song and they call it Good Old Shoe that they plant in the National Archives, and then a deep state honeypot agent convinces a reporter that she just had sex with that he needs to play this song to motivate the people, and of course the press runs with it. And then as icing on the cake, they astroturf a campaign of throwing old shoes into trees. The entire country is praying for Schumann to return home safely. Now right here I want to just pause for a second and draw your attention to this shot in the movie. This is Robert De Niro, Dustin Hoffman, and whatever her name is, walking out of the gates at the White House. That means that the White House, at bare minimum, read and approved the script and gave them access to the grounds to shoot this. The rest of the White House footage can easily be shot somewhere in Hollywood on a set, but this shot right here had to be approved by the White House. And when they do that, they read and approve the entire script. So just something.
One of their strategies is they like to tell us the truth through entertainment sometimes in order to frame it in the public consciousness as, oh, like, is what you're saying like that one time in that movie where they did this and this and this? And then within the public consciousness, they will be less capable of objectively analyzing it if they've seen that narrative play out in a movie before.
To keep in mind. So now that the whole country is waiting for this Schumann to be returned, they go to pick him up, only to discover that through some mix-up, the Schumann the military produces is a psychotic prisoner and a rapist. At this is the point where the movie really takes a turn into the absurd. It almost seems as if the filmmakers, well aware of how much truth they've already revealed, they need to slap on a few coats of satire for the sake of plausible deniability. This is also important because up until this point in the film, the audience in some ways can feel comfortable because at this point, while the government is being portrayed as being totally corrupt and out of hand, morally bankrupt, nobody has been physically hurt yet as a result. And that's all about the change. So while many humans have trouble looking down the road and seeing the horrors and the mass casualties that corruption leads to, it's not really apparent, or at least not nearly as apparent, as the danger of immediate physical injury and death. Even the lowest of IQ people watching this will understand that death and murder is bad. So in order for the filmmakers to keep telling their story, they're forced to kind of ratchet up the absurdity of the film so it disconnects these people a little bit further from reality. They're intentionally lowering the audience's suspension of disbelief because they don't want the audience to really believe what they're seeing. And the best way to do that is just to make everything really absurd. So Schumann is taking antipsychotics and...
You mix a little bit of truth with a bunch of really absurd things. This is a common propaganda tactic, as we saw in the last episode where we covered a new movie where two white conspiracy theorists are framed really badly, but they say maybe 30% true things and 70% outrageous lies. The purpose being here is to discredit the true part by adding in all this ridiculous narrative on top of it.
Is clearly in no condition to be presented to the American public as a hero. He has a fit, and that mixed with some bad weather causes them to get in a plane crash. Now, all the important people survive without a scratch. That's the ridiculous part. The truth here is that the pilots have died, and the group doesn't even care at all. It's not even mentioned. All that matters to them is maintaining the deception, no matter what the human cost. This is further hammered in when they hitch a ride to a payphone, and the psychotic Schumann decides to rape a farmer's daughter. The farmer freaks out and shoots and kills Schumann, and the important people, the way they react, they feel nothing, literally nothing at all for the girl that was just raped. Or for that matter, Schumann, who was just killed. It's all about the deception. It's all about maintaining the deception. So they find a way to spin it. They just say that he was in a terrible plane crash, and now they put on an epic show. A show of his casket being returned home, complete with a dog they have trained to follow the casket. The deception has finally been played out to its conclusion. The president is now sure to win re-election now, as the sheep in America just eat this up. They eat up the propaganda they're being spoon-fed, their bellies are full, and they are entertained. And this is the climax of the film, where Dustin Hoffman's character, the Hollywood producer that helped create this whole deception, he does the unthinkable. He decides he wants to take credit for the work. His sin is pride. He wants the world to know that it was him that was responsible for this entertainment. And of course, this is where we learn that even his life is expendable when it comes to maintaining the deception. The deception has to be protected at all costs, because that is all that separates the ruling class from the slave class. Information is power. Or as they look at it, they are smarter. They are the tail that wags the dog. And because it's this knowledge that keeps them in power, it has to be kept from the public at all costs. So what we see here is both a warning to other storytellers in the ruling class that if you fail to go along with the deception, no matter how instrumental you might think that you are, never hold yourself above the deception. You are always expendable. What we see here is a submission stance. A submission stance by the producer and the director of this film, who likely sees himself in this character. He's acknowledging that despite the role he may have played in revealing all these obscured truths, he knows how to protect the deception. And he knows what will happen if he fails. So is this the ruling class telegraphing to the public what they intend to do and what they have been doing for generations? Or is it all just a crazy coincidence? It's hard to watch this film and not think that it's not at least somewhat possible that this was indeed the ruling class giving the public a peek behind the curtain. You know, a lot of people forget, even Saddam Hussein's information minister, who was mocked widely in the media, mentioned this film, wagged the dog by name during the invasion of Iraq. Either way, the truths in this film can no longer be experienced as silly punchlines. They hit way too close to home. They elicit an entirely different emotion. An emotion that's 180 degrees out of phase with the emotion that audiences in 1997 experienced. And that emotion is rage. For Black Pill.
Very, very interesting. Love his analysis on propaganda. See if anyone said anything. Who are involved with the Epstein or mentioned or files? Oh, yeah, true. Probably a ton of people. Exactly, everything should be heard, especially if it makes sense. Indeed, Papa. All right, up next, I wanted to show you guys something. Where is it? Just want to take a look at the intro that they use for mainstream media and if there is possibly any sort of hypnotism intent here. So I'm not going to watch this whole video, but I'm going to watch part of it here.
A verb to denote the initiation of something or having something be provoked. I'm sure many of you guys noticed that after the switch to digital, specifically after the switch to digital, meaning it's no longer analog television, they can now layer as many signals into the digital signal as they want to, and there's no interference on your screen to let you know what all is being transmitted when they do that.
Just moments away from changing our whole world from analog to digital here, and it's so exciting.
Suddenly you had every major news outlet using these fast spinning globes and circular graphics.
So if we know that these media companies in the mainstream throughout recent history are being controlled by our enemies who are trying to program false beliefs into us to get us to not understand reality accurately and to manipulate us into self-destructive behavior and beliefs, why is it that it's so popular that they open their news networks with imagery like this? Just something to consider if maybe they believe it puts the public into the correct state to take in the information. Who knows?
That are moving very fast, spinning, and a lot of times they count down the viewing audience into the broadcast. It's almost as if they're counting people down into a hypnotic trance with the combination of the flicker rate and these very intricate spinning circular and spherical graphics. And I'm just going to show you a few examples of that. I'm going to slow them all down by 50% so that I'm not just showing you 10 of these in a row and it has some creepy effect on your brain. I just want you to recognize this and see it for what it actually is here. So you have that, especially after 2008, 2009, when they made the big switch. Now that's become the standard. That's just the standard graphics on any mainstream news show that you see anywhere. It's not a coincidence. And then now that that has been perfected and they've been using that for a while, now all of a sudden, oddly enough, they're finally starting to admit in the mainstream that hypnosis isn't just some wacky, debunked pseudoscience, but that it actually does work and affect your brain. And this is just one article that's an example of that in Forbes, where they're talking about research shows hypnosis has interesting effects on the brain. There's a lot of controversy about the validity of hypnosis. That's all
So very interesting, knowing what we now know about the level of deception that has been ongoing in these media companies since at least the 70s, if not much, much earlier. If we understand that these are a weapon being deployed against the public by bad actors, we just have to wonder, why are they using these hypnotic intros to all of their shows? And does that condition the public initially into the correct state to be accepting of the information? Just something to think about. And also interesting to note the eye and earth imagery that they frequently use.
purpose. It's been on purpose since they figured it out. Why would they tell everyone how this works and validate it if they hadn't perfected it yet? Anyways, you come down in here and it talks about, does hypnotism affect...
That reminds me, people often say like, oh, like, where's your source? How can I know this is true without a source? If the ruling class cult controls all the primary sources of information, which they do, they're not going to publish or allow anything to be published or maintained that fully breaks down all of their crimes against humanity and crimes against us and exactly how they work and validate that into the mainstream consciousness. We have been conditioned to trust only these sources of these mainstream sources that the ruling class gives us. And people have been conditioned to think, if there isn't a quote-unquote source confirming it's true, then I can't believe it. Which basically comes down to outsourcing all of your critical thought to this group of people. And the only way to really get out of a situation like this, when we're so deep into a psychological war, is to relearn how to trust our own critical thinking again. We're not going to be right about everything, but really a lot of the core problems here, it does not take a genius to understand the concepts that we need to understand here. We just need to trust our own ability to think critically again, and we need to stop outsourcing critical thought.
Brain activity. There have been several studies that have shown effects on brain activity after hypnotism. Mendelsohn et al. Studied this through giving people
And you guys can do some more research on hypnotism if you'd like. We'll move on from that topic. I already did the rice experiment and Antarctica. Did the mechanics of deception. That was by Black Pilled, by the way. Devin Stack. Excellent researcher on propaganda. I think next we'll do a Wyatt Stagg video, another expert on propaganda. Should we do Breaking Bad or George Carlin? I think George Carlin might be interesting. Go over how George Carlin was essentially part of the propaganda machine against the Western public. Many people praise George Carlin as a creative genius who was extremely funny. I agree that he was a creative genius who was extremely funny. But I later learned that a lot of the things he was saying also had a propaganda intention to condition public belief systems. Comedy itself is one of the best forms of propaganda and convincing people that something is true. When you laugh at something, it's sort of like an internal validation that, okay, maybe you think that might be true on some sort of internal level. And you can really learn a lot about what someone believes by what they laugh at as well. So, yeah. The social engineers understand the value of comedy and understand the value of controlling big mainstream comedians to push a message, which it is possible that George Carlin had a function like that here. But it's also possible that he was just brainwashed himself. But we'll take a look into this short video of George Carlin. If some of you guys love this comedian, sorry to potentially burst your bubble here and have you learn that maybe he did not have the best intent, but he is objectively funny and objectively talented. Nobody can really deny that. But I hope you guys enjoy looking into the propaganda of George Carlin here by Wyatt Stagg. All right, let's enjoy.
For a person that started out, was raised in Harlem, to now finding yourself celebrating your career in, of all places, Aspen.
Yeah.
I can't think of two more antithetical places than Harlem and Aspen.
Aspen, way too many whites.
Way too many whites.
Way too many whites. In fact, go around the world, way too many whites. Even though they're outnumbered, way too many. I can't wait until the brown and the black people begin showing up in the big war canoes to get their stuff back. Wouldn't that be fun? Isn't that going to be great? Because they're already showing up in England, you know, all that colony stuff. The chickens are coming home to roost. Hey, the food stamp, man! The food stamp! They're all going back. And it'll happen because the big blue-eyed man from the north is going to have to pay the price.
That's right. If symbolically, we should all wear pilgrim suits.
Yes.
I'm sitting there and I have my notebook out and I'm enjoying the show, and I wish I could live 1,000 years to watch this all develop. The rise of Russia, the rise of China, the Muslimization of Europe, the decline of the white race. It's going to be an amazing story as it develops, and I just wish I could see it all. I'm 70 now. I'll probably live to between 90 and 100, I think, and I'll get to see some of it, but it is an interesting, exciting thing to watch if you can detach yourself emotionally.
And you'll have anthrax in your water supply and sarin gas in your air conditioners. There'll be chemical and biological suitcase bombs in every city. And I say, enjoy it. Relax. Enjoy the show. Take a fucking chance. Put a little fun in your life. To me, terrorism is exciting. It's exciting. I think the very idea that you can set off a bomb in a marketplace and kill several hundred people is exciting and stimulating, and I see it as a form of entertainment. Entertainment, that's all it is. Yeah. If you want to slow down that drug traffic, you got to start executing a few of these fucking bankers. White, middle-class, Republican bankers. And I'm not talking about soft American executions like lethal injection.
Demonization here of white right-wing America.
I'm talking about fucking crucifixion, folks. Let's bring back crucifixions. I'll guarantee you one thing. You start executing, you start nailing one white banker per week to a big wooden cross on national TV, you're going to see that drug traffic begin to slow down pretty fucking quick. Pretty fucking quick. But we can bomb the shit out of your country, all right? Huh? We can bomb the shit out of your country, all right? Especially if your country is full of brown people. Oh, we like that, don't we? That's our hobby. That's our new job in the world, bombing brown people.
Again, more dehumanization here of white Americans, framing them as being just people who enjoy bombing brown people. When really what's going on there is good people are being tricked through emotional manipulation of atrocity propaganda to join wars that are actually harming people. They're not bad people themselves.
Iraq, Panama, Grenada, Libya, you got some brown people in your country. Tell them to watch the fuck out, or we'll goddamn bomb them. Well, when's the last white people you can remember that we bombed? Can you remember the last white? Can you remember any white people?
This country was founded by a group of slave owners who told us all men are created equal. Oh, yeah, all men, except for Indians and niggers and women, right? Always like to use that authentic American language. This was a small group of unelected white male landholding slave owners who also suggested their class be the only one allowed to vote.
Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. Another abomination. White guys over 10 years of age who wear their baseball hats backwards. White guys, let me tell you something. You're never going to be as cool as black guys. It's not going to happen. You're white and you're lame.
This is humiliation, a humiliation ritual of your people. They are making someone like George Carlin very famous. He is promoting comedy that is framing white people as just awful, detestable people who do not deserve to control their own systems in their own country. And as we know, most people of any group are just normal, good people who should not be getting dehumanized as a group.
It's a fucking law of nature. Turning your hat around and learning a complicated handshake will not make you cool. And another thing, I don't think white people should be trying to dance like blacks. Stop that. Stick to your faggoty polkas and waltzes. And that repulsive country line dancing shit that you do. And be yourself, be proud, be white, be lame, and get the fuck off the dance floor.
But it's interesting how we see some of the most famous entertainers. Many people will say, oh, I love George Carlin, not realizing that whether he knew it or not, he functioned as a psychological warfare weapon against the public. Now, it's possible that he himself was just brainwashed into these beliefs and was just a talented guy that got promoted in part for putting these beliefs in his comedy. But we also must understand, in my opinion, that it is perfectly possible that this person was intentionally conditioning the public mind to have a certain view of white Americans and white people more generally.
So this next piece of material, like most good ideas, is fairly simple. It's just a list of people who ought to be killed. White guys who shave their heads completely bald. You know? They're so ashamed they lost 11 hairs, they're going to try to turn it into some kind of a masculine statement. I say, hey, you goofy-looking, baldy-headed fuck. Looks good on black guys. On you, it's ugly, repulsive, and disgusting. You want to be bald? Do what I did. Wait a while. Yeah. Meantime, there's no excuse for running around looking like a freshly circumcised dick. When is this shit gonna go away? When are these fat, arrogant, overpaid, overfed, overprivileged, overindulged, white-collar business criminal asshole cocksuckers gonna put out their cigars and move along to their next abomination? White pussy businessmen sucking on a big brown dick. That's all it is. That's all it is. That's all it ever was. Yeah. A big brown dick. Sigmund Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Oh yeah? Well, sometimes it's a big brown dick. With a fat, arrogant, white-collar business criminal asshole sucking on the wet end of it. But hey, the news is not all bad for me. Not all bad. You want to know the good part? Cancer of the mouth. Good. Here, as long as we're talking about theme restaurants, I got a proposition for you. I think if white people are going to burn down black churches, then black people ought to burn down the House of Blues. Huh? What a fucking disgrace that place is. The House of Blues. They ought to call it the House of Lame White Motherfuckers. Inauthentic, low-frequency, single-digit, lame white motherfuckers. It's a fucking sack.
And notice how the audience here applauds every time he frames white people negatively. This was the culture purposely being promoted systematically through all of the entertainment, the media, the education, to convince the entire public that white people are basically inherently bad, and that if white people are to behave as a collective like any other group does out of survival, then that makes them bad. And they can't help but be bad if they do that. They can't help but be evil if they do that. From the ruling class perspective, they understand that their biggest threat, well, infiltrating and running these deceptions on Western territory is if white people, who are the ones who built Western civilization, if they are able to learn about what's going on as a group and have the strength and collective power to do something about it. Basically, their only threat is white people collectivizing and doing something to defend themselves. This is why any form of white collectivism has been heavily demonized ever since World War II. It's not because white people behaving as a collective or regaining a racial consciousness is a threat to the public. It's because it's a threat to the ruling class agenda against humanity. It would actually benefit all of humanity to support white people fighting for their own interests, because they are the ones best equipped, on average, to fight back against this.
Sacrilege. In the first place, white people got no business playing the blues ever, at all, under any circumstances, ever. What the fuck do white people have to be blue about? Banana Republic ran out of khakis? Huh? The espresso machine is jammed? Hootie and the Blowfish are breaking up? Shit, white people ought to understand their job is to give people the blues, not to get them. It's a good thing Lewis and Clark never had a bad hair day. Or Daniel Boone, huh? Custer? He had a really bad hair day. But he had it coming, that blonde, blue-eyed criminal fuck. Airport security is a stupid idea, it's a waste of money, and it's only there for one reason, to make white people feel safe. That's all. White people, white middle-class Republican bankers. White male land-holding slave owners who are lame white motherfuckers. Greedy, well-fed white people have... White people ought to... White pussy businessmen...
Death in the year 2008, he had attained the status of a contemporary cultural icon. Though a comedian, his meditations on the modern world have won him a popular reputation as a philosopher, and he has been heralded as everything from a sage to a prophet, attracting an almost cult-like devotion among his fan base. These devotees, convinced of the value of Carlin's many observations and insights, treat his words as words to live by. Carlin, however, was no authentic countercultural figure, but a manufactured product of the very system of power he pretended to critique. Over the course of his 5-decade career as a comedian, he served as a willing mouthpiece for the subverted cultural establishment, helping to promote the tenets of the death cult that has hijacked Western civilization, all the while masquerading as a rebel from the public platform provided to him by television networks such as NBC and HBO.
Exactly. They framed him as being edgy and counterculture, but really he was accomplishing the primary goal of dehumanizing white people so that they would not try and stop the elite agenda. Or rather, not be able to.
Consciously cultivating the public image of a no-nonsense, down-to-earth American everyman, Carlin was able to present the tenets of radical cultural Marxism in a manner designed to appeal to an audience consisting primarily of white American men, duping them into laughing at jokes made at their own expense and agreeing with ideas and statements inimical to their own interests. Listening to his act with the benefit of hindsight, it is now apparent that there is no fundamental distinction between Carlin's worldview and that espoused by a morbidly obese, blue-haired professor of feminist studies with a minor in critical whiteness. Carlin simply said all of the same things in a gravelly voice. The personification of white liberal guilt and self-loathing, Carlin emerged from the well sewer of every destructive tendency in modern American culture. His artistic influences were subversive comics like Lenny Bruce and Mort Sahl, whose hostility to white America and ethnic Europeans he enthusiastically imitated. His heroes were the black musicians and entertainers pushed by the mass media, and he openly expressed his cloying admiration for them and his corresponding disdain for white artists on multiple occasions. His brain, already degraded by the pernicious influence of post-war liberalism, was further corroded through the abuse of illicit drugs, a habit which resulted in multiple heart attacks and lifelong poor health. Though a member of the silent generation, Carlin was a true child of Woodstock, embodying every ideological sickness associated with boomer liberalism as he synthesized the hippie mysticism of a Terence McKenna with the moralizing Marxist social critique of an Abbie Hoffman. Treating the stage as his pulpit, Carlin railed against white America with the fire and brimstone rage of a revivalist preacher, clad in black from head to toe to lend his disguised sermons a religious gravitas. Despite being an atheist, at times he almost seemed to pray for divine judgment to be visited upon the white Americans he so despised, reveling in bizarre masturbatory fantasies of their suffering and destruction. In one segment of his HBO special, Life is Worth Losing, Carlin described in detail his ideal end-of-the-world scenario, in which a raging inferno spreads uncontrollably across America, mysteriously bypassing the multicultural cities as it incinerates white communities.
And the fire spreads across the Great Plains, toasting the wheat, cooking the cattle, and producing hamburgers, actually. Then it leaps the Mississippi and races through the South, blowing up stills, interrupting lynchings, and killing millions of inbred people. And the suburbs burn uncontrollably, and thousands of identical homes have identical fires with identical smoke, killing all the identical soccer moms and their identical kids named Jason and Jennifer. The fire moves to New York City, and the people in New York tell the fire to go fuck itself. Go fuck yourself. Yeah, and it does. Yeah.
And look how the audience just claps and applauds to this comedian that is actually functioning as a psychological warfare weapon against you. And the elite love this too. They love how humiliating it is that people do not understand how they're being manipulated in such environments and applaud at the weapons destroying them.
And it does. So instead it burns down Long Island and Connecticut, killing all the rich white assholes and completely destroying their evil faggoty golf courses.
In a 2022 interview with The New Yorker, Carlin's daughter Kelly revealed to nobody's surprise that her father, quote, had a pure disdain and loathing for white men in America, and this pathological hatred of ethnic Europeans manifested itself in almost every aspect of Carlin's comedy. His loathing for white men at times reached the point of such irrational intensity that, entering a state of rage-induced hysteria, he would rail violently against everything from white men who wear baseball caps backwards, to white men who dare to shave their heads, to white men who have the confidence to dance. Elsewhere, he sets his sights on every expression of archetypal white masculinity, derisively condemning what he described as deadly male subcultures, among which he counted the outdoors and gun culture and the car and machinery culture, while oddly omitting the inner-city gang culture and the organized financial exploitation culture. Railing against the pussification of the American male, he simultaneously embodied it. The only fitting role for the white man in Carlin's view, it seems, was as a defenseless object of abuse and humiliation, living in worshipful, obsequious servility to all of the world's so-called minorities, whom he held to be above criticism or even good-natured comedic ribbing. In a now-famous interview with Larry King, Carlin's usual irreverent machismo suddenly disappears when discussing the permissibility of humor targeting non-whites, replaced by a simpering paternalism.
I would defend to the death his right to do everything he does. The thing that I find unusual, and it's not a criticism so much, but his targets are underdogs. And comedy traditionally has picked on people in power, people who abuse their power. Women and gays and immigrants are kind of, to my way of thinking, underdogs. And, he ought to be careful because he's Jewish. And a lot of the people who want to pick on these kind of groups, the Jews are on that list a little further. You got women, gays, gypsies, blah, 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 and then suddenly you find Jews. And Andrew,
suddenly Andrew's arrested.
Yeah, so, obviously he should do what he wants. And
why does he get away with it, do you think, then? Well, we have never laughed at jokes about the
he's appealing. I think he's appealing largely. I think his core audience are young white males who are threatened by these groups. I think a lot of these guys aren't sure of their manhood because that's a problem when you're going through adolescence. Am I really? Could I be? I hope I'm not one of them. And the women who assert themselves and are competent are a threat to these men, and so are immigrants in terms of jobs and the
So that's why we as an audience then will laugh.
You say we. I don't think you're. But I think you're
collective we.
I think that's what is at the core of that experience that takes place in these arenas. Is a certain, a sharing of anger and rage at these targets. And
Carlin's hatred for biological white life was matched only by his loathing for white culture and values. His well-known contempt for religion, in reality, only extended to those religions historically practiced by ethnic Europeans. The antipathy he displayed towards conservative Christians, for example, came with no corresponding hostility for Muslims, despite their social conservatism. On the contrary, he expressed obvious sympathies for Muslims on a number of separate occasions, even remarking in a 2007 Opie and Anthony interview that he was excited for the, quote, Muslimization of the West. Carlin's rigorous standards for rationality and his contempt for superstition, it seems, were only ever applied to people of European descent, as other groups benefited from a thoroughgoing cultural relativism that rendered their beliefs and values exempt from his reductionist critiques. The distinct impression is of a worldview in which white people are morally obliged to burden themselves with self-hatred, atheism, and existential nihilism, while other racial groups are encouraged to embrace spirituality and celebrate life. These double standards were visible in much of Carlin's philosophy. A critic of war and capital punishment who often paid lip service to pacifistic ideals, he gave frequent expression to his sadistic brand of anti-white misanthropy, speaking with near-orgasmic glee as he described the excitement he felt watching mayhem and destruction unfold. Reflecting upon Carlin's worldview and the content of his comedic material, one is given the impression of a man afflicted by a deep spiritual and moral sickness. In his frequent diatribes on childbirth and abortion, Carlin raved hysterically against anyone who opposed the murder of unborn children, cursing the concept of the sanctity of life as he compared the act of aborting a baby to making an omelette. Elsewhere, he described childbirth as pumping out a unit, condemning parents for polluting the earth with these creatures who have no future.
Here's another question I have. How come when it's us, it's an abortion, and when it's a chicken, it's an omelet? Not every ejaculation deserves a name. They're not pro-life.
Just awful here. Very evil way to look at the world. A spiritually sick way to compare a human being aborted to making an omelet.
If you know what they are, they're anti-woman. Simple as it gets. Anti-woman. They don't like it. They don't like women. They believe a woman's primary role is to function as a broodmare for the state. Pro-life. You don't see many of these white anti-abortion women volunteering to have any black fetuses transplanted into their uteruses, do you? Will 7 be enough, Bob? But twins, polluting the earth. Polluting the earth with these creatures who have no future. They have no future.
Comedy like this functions as incredibly powerful propaganda. Once people get into a state where they're mocking the other side in a situation like this, where you're in a large group of people just laughing hysterically at how ridiculous it is that anyone could not believe what you believe, this is a prime state that the social engineers want to get you in, so that it shuts off your ability to think critically about the topic. When someone comes at you trying to explain their side, you'll immediately dismiss them and mock them and socially attack them, just as George Carlin does here.
Some people have ascribed a prophetic quality to Carlin's comedy, believing that the accuracy of his predictions concerning the social and political trajectory of American society serves as a testament to the validity of his cultural insights. But Carlin was no prophet. He was simply, by his own admission, a part of the movement that helped to engineer the very degraded social conditions he was describing. In one revealing monologue, Carlin bragged openly of his role as an agent of social decay, boasting that he consciously spread cultural degeneration, both because it benefited him professionally and because it simply amused him to do so.
I enjoy chaos and disorder, not just because they help me professionally. They're also my hobby. You see, I'm an entropy fan. When I first heard of entropy in high school science, I was attracted to it immediately. When they told me that in nature, all systems are breaking down, I thought, what a good thing. What a good thing. Perhaps I can make some small contribution in this area myself.
And there it is. He admits that he is consciously contributing bad ideas into the public consciousness that will create chaos over time.
Carlin's enduring popularity in the dissident right, at first inexplicable, actually serves to illustrate the powerful allure of the Black Bill. His nihilism and misanthropy appeals to those who lack the courage to continue the fight, and instead seek comfort in giving the world the middle finger while pretending to be taking the moral and intellectual high road. These people, often critical of religious believers, ironically seek out an opiate for life in atheism and materialist reductionism, convincing themselves that if nothing matters, there is nothing to strive for. Rendered impotent by their hopelessness, they choose to sit back and laugh at the chaos rather than oppose it. In other words, Carlin's philosophy functions for them as a coping mechanism for the troubled times in which we find ourselves. Some of these right-leaning fans, desperate to find a kindred spirit in the world of popular entertainment, have even deluded themselves into believing that Carlin would have been sympathetic to our cause. In reality, his stated social and political views put him firmly in the same camp as the Jimmy Kimmels and Stephen Colberts of the world. Had he lived into the 2020s, Carlin would likely have come to serve as a textbook case of Trump derangement syndrome, and would have enthusiastically spread his cheeks for BLM, ADL, and LGBTQ. In spite of the lip service he paid to the concept of free speech, Carlin made it abundantly clear that he viewed any comedy directed at non-whites or non-heterosexuals as dangerous, hateful, and morally illicit. A supposed enemy of political correctness, he appeared to have defined it as any attempt to counter hateful rhetoric directed at white people and social conservatives. The benefit of hindsight empowers one to make a number of critical observations concerning the nature of Carlin's role in Western culture and the enduring impact of his legacy. In summation, George Carlin was an agent of cultural demoralization who served to devitalize, enfeeble, and degenerate the white American mind through infecting it with liberalism, nihilism, and self-hatred, thereby paving the way for America's decline and overthrow. An ideological parasite exploiting the weakened cultural immune system of the post-war West, Carlin's grotesque ideas have spread through the host body like a metastatizing cancer, destroying cells and turning healthy tissue into tumorous ideological growths. A proto-neckbeard himself, the psychic epidemic which Carlin helped to perpetuate has spawned legions of other neckbeards, edgelords, and fedora wearers, who continue to subject Western culture to their smug, pseudo-intellectual reductionism. Worse, Carlin's racial politics prefigured the mainstreaming of the anti-white agenda, as he was without doubt one of the most outspoken purveyors of anti-white hate and white self-loathing in the history of American media. As an astute businessman who knew where his bread was buttered, Carlin learnt early to pander to the media controllers upon whose whims he would rise or fall. For decades he served as a willing puppet for the very system of power he pretended to oppose, playing the rebel as he danced to their tune. And his masters compensated him well for his loyal service, showering him with wealth in life and gratuitous accolades in death. One can readily imagine his wealthy overseers rubbing their hands with glee as he called for the mass public crucifixions of middle-class white Republican bankers. An apostle of nihilism and self-loathing, Carlin waged a tireless war against strength, beauty, and life, becoming the living embodiment of the idiom, misery loves company. This moral crusade against all that is good in the world was his raison d'etre, and he died bitterly cursing the gift of life to the very end. Lashing out in impotent fury at his betters, Carlin avenged his own feelings of weakness and inadequacy on his fellow white Americans, desperately striving to infect them with his existential despair and to divest them of their hopes, their dreams, and their self-respect. Carlin was a gift-giver, and the bug chasers in his audience lapped up his ideological poison like a swarm of hungry rats, even as they choked upon it. In all of its unnatural absurdity, it is hard not to see a George Carlin comedy show as a microcosm of the modern Western world and the nadir of the suicide cult that has overtaken it. In a now famous 2007 interview, Carlin said that if you are born in America, you are given a front row seat to the freak show. What he didn't tell us is that he was the main act. If we are to survive the coming storm, we must reject Carlin's brand of fanatical cuckoldry and all of its works.
Absolutely. Excellent analysis there. Very good work, as always. There's a lot of fans of George Carlin, and hopefully if any of them are watching right now are reconsidering their love of his work and acknowledging that he may have functioned, in fact, as a weapon against the public. Alright, before we finish up here on the last video of the day, I'll check the chat quick. This guy loves white. Yeah, he does say white a lot there, eh? That was a bit excessive, showing that many clips of him saying it. Habanero says, I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if we can assume that he'd be super woke if he was still alive. Yeah, fair enough. It might be not comedically wise to be super woke, and he might have recognized that and taken the anti-woke perspective. Because the woke comedy isn't going to be successful, and he probably would have recognized that. But it's hard to say. But good comment there. But yeah, that was an excellent breakdown. For the last video of the day, I wanted to look at this short video by YouTube channel EXQUO Fonty. Very good channel. I think this is just going to be a good way to finish off the evening. Have us all gather around on this cold November night, contemplating the meaning of life. I hope you guys have enjoyed the episode so far. And thank you for joining me in the chat and everything. And let's get into this final little video and final little analysis of the evening before we go to sleep tonight. Alright. Hope you all enjoy.
What is the meaning of life? This question is often met with humorous or dismissive answers like 42 or be nice and avoid eating fat, because many assume that there is no real answer. This invites us to reflect, what was I expecting? What kind of answer would have satisfied me? When you ask, what is the meaning of X, you could be asking for different things. 1. Definitional meaning. If you look up life in a dictionary, you'll find the meaning of the word life, but not the meaning of life itself. 2. Symbolic meaning. If you analyze a dream, you can research what objects and events represent, but that is not what we're looking for either. We're not searching for what life stands for. 3. Inner coherence. When you walk into a movie partway through, the details appear random and behaviors unpredictable, but as you watch, dots start to connect, and at some point things click. We ask, what is the meaning of life, not expecting a direct answer like 42, but rather hoping for an insight that gives life a sense of inner coherence, framing the fragmented parts of it within a larger whole. The pieces may have always been there, but now they belong to something, and once they belong, they matter. Where does meaning come from? Let's begin with first principles. Level 1, the physical layer. All things begin with evolutionary computation, the universal process of continuous recursive disambiguation from the atomic to the molecular to the organismic to the civilizational level. Evolutionary computation selects for traits which solve for persistence, resulting in the generation of form. Form sets the range of possible action because a thing's structure determines both its behavioral affordances and limitations. Function refers to those actions that persist because they solve problems and so are retained and repeated. Now, what is the form of a human being? Humans are essentially self-conscious collectivists. Natural selection acted simultaneously on individuals and on groups, producing what Emil Durkheim called homo duplex, beings who live and act on two levels, both individual and collective. This duality is wired into our psychology. We can think and act as individuals, but also possess a cognitive hive switch that triggers collective identity and ego transcendence, enabling group cohesion and sacrifice. Humans don't merely tolerate life in groups because it is strategically necessary. They long for participation in something greater than themselves. As for biological function, the purpose of human animals is the same as any other, to reproduce and preserve our kind. If we don't endure as a distinct people, nothing else really matters anyway. But because humans possess reflexive self-awareness and knowledge of our finitude and mortality, we cannot be satisfied with simply performing our function like a cow. We require a larger narrative context which justifies our actions, making life feel worthy of being perpetuated. Thus, in our search for meaning, we cross from the physical level of causality to the psychological. As Brett Anderson explains in his article, The Evolutionary Psychology of Meaning in Life, the psyche tracks integration across three facets. 1. Coherence, the world and the self make sense. 2. Direction, my behavior is directed by clear goals. And 3. Significance, I am socially embedded and matter to others. The more our beliefs, values, goals, perceptions, and behavior are aligned, the more integrated our psyche, signaled by the felt mood of meaning. The less these things are aligned, the more disintegrated our psyche, signaled by the feeling of anxiety. This is why meaning and anxiety are inversely related. Anxiety rises when there is a conflict between internal subsystems, such as when our motives and values contradict each other. Meaning, in this sense, is the positive valence of low internal conflict. But coherence, direction, and significance cannot remain isolated parts. They require a unifying principle that gives them form. This is the function of narrative. Narrative acts as an interpretive filter, selecting and arranging events into a temporal arc. In this way, narrative provides the shape of meaning, both the frame that binds the facets of integration into a whole, and the lens through which we perceive that whole as intelligible. Integration weaves the threads, beliefs, values, goals, desires, and behaviors, and narrative provides the pattern that makes the fabric recognizable. Put another way, integration is the grammar of narrative, since a narrative only works if the pieces actually fit together coherently, and narrative is the grammar of meaning, since what makes coherence intelligible and telic is a story, arranging life's threads into a pattern we can perceive and a story we can live. Even something objectively great, such as Michelangelo's famous statue of David, derives its deepest meaning from its narrative context. Stripped of that context, David is merely a masterful piece of marble admired for technical execution. But people do not cross the world to see it because it is technically impressive, they revere it because it embodies the spirit of Renaissance Florence. It is an icon of a particular people, civilization, time, and place. The marble and chisel gave it physical form, the story gave it its soul. So too with our lives, they acquire meaning as works of art within the collective story of our people. In our search for meaning so far, we have crossed from the physical to the psychological level. Now, having brought up collective narrative, it is time to move from the psychological to the civilizational level. As we've seen, individual psychic integration requires narrative, but a purely personal narrative is thin and fragile outside the anchoring framework of a collective narrative. Only within the transcendent order of the group can integration be fully realized and life become maximally meaningful. All the self-help in the world cannot produce healthy individuals in an atomized society. Remember, the human form is homo.
And that's what we have today. A totally atomized society with relationships breaking down, with meaning being stripped away, atheist materialistic thinking being pushed on us. We're being pushed into being atomized consumers who are addicted to screens. And under these conditions, we basically do not have a high chance of survival. And means that we cannot fight back against the tyranny being inflicted upon us. It was always the goal, since way back in the 70s, to get us to precisely where we are today, into the current weak state, the demasculinized state, the atomized state that we are today. They have systematically destroyed our identities, destroyed our storylines about what we believe about our countries and our ancestors. They have systematically dehumanized our ancestors and framed white people as being responsible for all of the evil in the world. They have made the story of who we are as something to believe in a negative light. They have demonized our entire history, essentially. And if you have a demonized history within your mental construct, you cannot really be that overly attached. You cannot be appropriately attached to the meaning of that story. And should that story go away and your people die, then it doesn't really matter that much, because maybe it's actually a good thing that your people die if you're guilty of all this evil throughout history. This is how they weaken us. This is how they strip our identities. And this is how they conquer us. So, to combat this, we need to bring meaning back into our lives. We need to bring Christianity back into our lives. We need to start caring for our families again. We need to start caring for everyone in your societies again. We need to look at ourselves as one extended family. That is how a healthy nation functions. Our people. A country is a people. And we need to get back to a healthy place of loving ourselves, loving our people, producing positive storylines about our people in order to survive what's coming in the future.
Duplex. We are not, nor have we ever been, natural individualists. The sequence of meaning production at the civilizational level starts with group evolutionary strategy. For a people's story to endure, it must be embedded and embodied in a group evolutionary strategy which serves to align individual behavior with collective survival, producing individuals capable of sacrifice, coordination, and reproduction in service to something larger than themselves. Collective narrative is one component of that group evolutionary strategy, serving as an interface connecting group members to their group evolutionary strategy, making it intelligible and emotionally compelling. Identity Place Role Measurement, or IPRM, provides the concrete daily channels through which individuals find belonging, order, service, and feedback to embody that group evolutionary strategy. Let's break each of these down a little bit. Identity answers the question, to whom do I belong? Your identity names your family, tribe, and nation, your kin, kith, and folk, without whom you are nothing. You are your father's son, your nation's citizen, your ancestor's heir. Identity also makes clear who you are not, thereby demarcating the in-group from the out-group. Without identity, there is no us, and so no organization. Place answers the question, where do I belong? Place refers to your position in the social hierarchy of your group, giving your life a clear shape by determining your obligations and expectations. Without people knowing their place, there is no order, and without order, no harmony. Role and
if you have no identity for a people within a country, you are very easily conquered, because there's no unity there, there's no reason, there's no higher meaning, there's no incentive to try and self-sacrifice to protect the interests of your family and your people. You need to have a collective identity. Collective identity is critical to survival in the natural world. So people say, oh, I'm above identity politics. Like, I'm not one of those low-class people who plays identity politics. Oh, not realizing that it is actually critical to survival. And this push to not play identity politics, the goal of that is that white people do not play identity politics. All other groups do play identity politics and are guaranteed to continue playing identity politics. If you're the only group within a society that is not playing identity politics, you are not going to survive. It is really that simple. White people should maybe consider stopping playing identity politics once everyone else is done playing identity politics, but until that day comes, we are forced into playing identity politics.
answers the question, how do I serve? In a healthy society, your role is not arbitrary, but connects you to a function that supports your people, biologically, economically, and culturally. In a healthy society, members are not free-floating individuals, but threads in a unified social fabric, preserving the past, sustaining the present, and securing the future. Measurement answers the question, am I serving well? A system of measurement provides the standards, signals, and feedback that allow individuals to calibrate their behavior, ensuring that the man who serves well is esteemed while the one who defects is sanctioned. Together, IPRM connect the individual to the group's narrative and evolutionary strategy. Just as coherence, direction, and significance integrate the submodules of the individual's psyche, so identity, place, role, and measurement integrate the individual members of the collective. We can now see that life is both a story and a game. Narrative and strategy are complementary, revealing different sides of that same reality. Meaning arises when story and strategy at both the individual and collective levels are fused. When personal story is embedded in a collective narrative, personal actions are integrated into collective strategy, collective narrative gives meaning to personal actions, and collective strategy gives direction to personal story. If meaning arises from psychic integration within a people's story and strategy, the West's meaning crisis is no mystery. It is the direct result of the disintegrative logic of liberalism. Born of the Enlightenment, liberalism is essentially a rebellion against what Heidegger called thrownness, the reality that each of us is cast into a particular time, place, people, and story. You do not choose your parents, ethnicity, sex, language, or history. These givens define the raw material of your life. Traditionally, heritage was seen as good and natural. A boy was his father's son. A Roman was heir to Rome. Liberalism, by contrast, tells us to resent our thrownness and reframes every tie, our very inheritance, as oppression and restriction to be cast aside. Liberalism undergirds both the left and mainstream right, which are but two flavors of liberalism, sharing the same foundational premises. One, universalism, or...
Good point here that modern left and right wing both function as liberalism. And liberalism in itself was a ruling class strategy in order to trick the Western public into becoming naive and ignorant about the dangers in their environment, and to weaponize their empathy into causing them to... They're exploiting their empathy in the storylines that have an inverted truth in order to cause them to not have an accurate understanding of reality. If you don't have an accurate understanding of reality, then you are not going to survive long term. You'll be easy to control and easy to abuse. So the goal of liberalism is to present a story that sounds morally superior on paper, but again, because it does not align with reality, just causes self-destructive beliefs and self-destructive behavior in the population, which was the goal from the start.
Or sameness over distinction. That is, what makes us all the same is more real, valuable, or morally binding than what makes us distinct. Its effect is to collapse qualitative distinctions by making the universal ontologically prior to the particular. 2. Individualism, or part before whole. That is, the individual is imagined to exist prior to and independent of the group. Its effect is to collapse organic bodies, family, community, nation, into aggregates of individuals. The first premise gives birth to the second. If mankind is more real than a particular tribe or nation, then groups are derivative. If groups are derivative, their claims can never outweigh those of man as such. And once groups lose ontological standing, only individuals remain. Once only individuals are really real, the individual must come before the group. And voila, society is redefined as a voluntary contract among interchangeable parts. Together, the premises of liberalism dissolve.
And once they have this thought system in place, they can flood the countries with weaponized migration in order to replace the host white populations and ensure that the host white populations never become a serious threat from the ruling class perspective on the agenda against humanity.
Identity, place, and role, leaving the individual floating free of any story or strategy larger than himself. Liberalism thus undermines the conditions from which meaning arises in two ways. First, the individual is cut loose from his group, told that his identity, place, and role are self-authored rather than inherited, and that his group, the extended order of kin, community, and nation, is not an organic reality, but a construct, a mere aggregation of individuals bound together only by assent to propositions. Second, narrative is separated from strategy. The inflation of our story into universalist abstractions like the moral arc of history and progress toward universal human rights and equality detaches narrative from its concrete particulars, thereby disabling it from guiding collective action. Once the group's strategy can no longer be enacted, its members become deracinated, interchangeable laborers and consumers, seeking through consumption the meaning and belonging that only participation in a living tradition can provide. If entropy is the dissolution of distinctions, boundaries, and hierarchy, then liberalism is entropic by its very nature, dissolving the forms that once gave society its shape and cohesion. These intermediary institutions and ways of life once stitched people into a unified social fabric. The family, gender roles, guilds, councils, traditions, kinship obligations, and localism. These structures had previously.
It's a way to erode all of these critical pillars of society from the inside, which is the only warfare tactic that could have worked to destroy the West, as they were too powerful to take on in a physical head-on war. So they needed to be tricked through deception and misled about their identity and exploited into a false understanding of themselves and the world around them, so that they would be easy to conquer long term.
He answered the questions, to whom do I belong, where do I stand, and how do I serve? The left interprets structure as oppression, thus it must liberate the child from its family, women from the patriarchy, and minorities from majority culture, collapsing the vertical distinctions of excellence and authority so no one may stand above another. The mainstream right interprets structure as constraint, thus it must liberate the individual from all unchosen duties, customs, authorities, and ties to place and inherited identity, dissolving the horizontal bonds of solidarity, which once embedded the individual within a family, community, and folk. What liberalism dissolves socially, the individual experiences psychologically. Social entropy becomes psychological entropy, manifest as cognitive dissonance, anxiety, and identity crisis. As Martin Stepan observes, quote, "Functional regimes are the ones that allow people to perform their role and reward them for it, not the ones that let them do whatever they want without instruction. Humans without group strategy, without human purpose, go back to being mere animals and make perfect labor and perfect customers, having no aspirations beyond hedonism, exactly the kind of humans merchants need." So my suggestion would be that if your meaning of life hasn't been made clear to you, it's because your group strategy has been stolen from you. End quote. The meaning crisis of our age is not something we will.
And it is well put like that. White Western group strategy in a survival context has been stolen from us because we have been brainwashed into this false understanding of the world. In an ideal society, we have responsibilities. Men have certain responsibilities, women have certain responsibilities. For instance, women have, on average, have a responsibility to raise the children of the next generations in a society. And men have their obvious responsibilities as well. And in the modern context, it's all about whatever I want personally that's the number one thing. And that's all that matters. And it just creates this sick culture of atomized consumers that are easy to control and to indoctrinate.
Read, think, or meditate our way out of. It is a result of abandoning our thrownness, our heritage, and the primal obligations that go along with it. In-group preference, patriarchal order, eugenic discipline, the universal militia, sanctioning of subversives, punishing of defectors, the expulsion of traitors and parasites, pursuit of vitality, praise of excellence, shaming of all that is weak and ugly, and conferral of status upon women for raising the next generation. Moreover, we must not only reclaim our heritage, but reject the liberal foundations that dissolve it. Universalism, which makes sameness prior to distinction, and individualism, which makes the part prior to the whole. Any system built upon these poisonous premises is doomed to revert to liberalism, no matter how noble its founders' intent. When Europeans again become conscious of themselves as a people with a distinct nature, history, strategy, and destiny, we will no longer suffer a crisis of meaning. Meaning will arise as it always has, and we will no longer look for it, nor will we even think to ask what life's meaning is, because we will simply be living it.
Excellently put there. And I believe this reawakening of white Western people, a racial reawakening, where we start to care about our group interests again, is inevitable over the next 5 to 10 years. So it'll be quite interesting to see how that plays out. All right, we've had a great night so far. Nobody else has said anything in the chat. I hope anyone still watching is enjoying the show. Damn, we started at 8:30 and it is just about midnight. Gone over a bunch of different topics. I like just ending on that meaning of life one. Good thing to contemplate the ideas shared in that video and contemplate really everything that we talked about tonight. From the power of our intent and thoughts on others, with thoughts to treat people with loving kindness, especially these days with the suffering the average person is going through, to Antarctica, and to the topics of psych warfare, finishing it off with the meaning of life here. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. I hope everyone enjoyed tonight. That was Mind War Episode 3, and I'll be coming back with Episode 4 very soon. I'll see you guys there. Take care.